Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate each and every one of you for being here. This is a pretty big accomplishment to make it to OSDA state finals. And with that, I'll begin with my gaveling procedures first. They're completely standard. I do 1 tap at 2 minutes, 2 taps at 2:30, 3 taps at 2:55. At 3:05, I will begin gaveling you down, and at 3:10, there will be a verbal cutoff, just to ensure that we do get as many speeches in as we possibly can. For questioning, it will be 1 tap at 20 seconds, and then at 30 seconds, I will immediately move on to the next questioner. And no, I will not be allowing any grace periods for my session. For prefacing, I define prefacing as anything not stated in the Constitution, not common knowledge, and any non-super common Supreme Court case. And I do not tolerate that. If someone does preface, I will issue a verbal warning, but the second time you do preface, you will have your questioning block rescinded and you will not be able to finish your block.
And that is how the OSDA defines prefacing, so please do not over-question or overstep what prefacing is.
For back and forth questioning, I define that as the person being questioned stating a question back to the questioner, and it also is defined as, I believe, the questioner saying simply a statement instead of question. Please make sure that your questions are actually questions and not just simple statements. And that will follow the same rules as prefacing as previously defined. And with that, I believe the chair now looks for a motion. Motion recognized.
Motion to suspend the rules and vote by placard.
Any seconds? Any objections? Seeing none, that motion does pass. Any other motions?
Point of inquiry, the parliamentarian. Are we allowed to hold an open chamber in this final session or no?
Did not hear any yeses or nos. I know it sounds like for the previous debates it's been open. I'm okay with open chambers, but I know because we had a lot of observers, it needs to be everyone is seated. It is not in the middle of a questioning period. It is definitely not in the middle of a speech, and that goes for observers as well. Please do not disrupt the chamber.
Thank you. That being said, motion?
Motion recognized.
The discretion of the parliamentarian to hold an open chamber?
Any seconds?
Second.
Any objections? Seeing none, that motion does pass. The chair now looks for a final motion.
Motion?
Motion
I
recognized.
move to begin debate.
Any seconds?
Second.
Any objections? Seeing none, that motion does pass. We will now begin debate on piece of legislation F3, a bill to ban police use of facial recognition technology. Would any of the judges like me to read this legislation out loud?
Please don't.
Well, seeing that, we will now look for a first affirmative or sponsorship speech. Any and all first affirmative speakers, please rise now. Representative Young, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. This is Representative Young speaking for the first time today and first time this legislative session. I would just like to congratulate everyone on making it to the final round.
And quickly, do any of the judges have any objection to me using my phone as a timer? Thank you.
Maybe another gesture off again. When you hit a difficult problem on a math test, is the first thing you do to give up? When you get that problem that asks you to find the maximum of the quadratic, do you just simply give up and leave it blank? No, representatives. And why are you moving to leave today's answer blank? Today's legislation offers so much more if you simply analyze it. And if you stand on negation, I will convince you that today's bill is what we need to pass. But first, stand on passing today's bill because in the status quo, we lack regulations in the first place. According to Bloomberg Law, they tell us with police facial recognition technology, a majority of states, and not even the federal government, have any regulations actually dictating when it can and cannot be used. Now this is a problem, because it shows that the negation of today's argument wants to end it before it has even begun. Furthermore, we can look to how actually improving regulations can help the privacy of our constituents. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, they tell us by implementing transparency within data, by requirements for human review and redress, we can protect our constituents' privacy, which is a common issue seen with facial recognition technology. Additionally, Brookings Institute tells us that expanding the standards for how long images can actually be held is another common regulation that can help protect privacy. Therefore, if you plan on standing up to negation, please realize that there are other methods we can do to regulate facial recognition technology and reap the benefits. So let's talk about those benefits. I want to start this off by giving you a shocking fact. According to Reuters, almost every single state that has ever determined facial recognition technology to be banned has overturned that ban. In fact, we can look to Virginia, which was the first state to ban facial recognition technology and had one of the harshest codes on it. But they have overturned their ban. And it's because they realized that in the status quo, facial recognition technology has something to offer. In today's debate, I have no doubt that a negation speaker will come up here and tell you that facial recognition technology is inaccurate. However, I will be the one to establish that that is not the case. It is beyond its preliminary stages. In fact, we can look to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, a government department who ran a test on Clear AI, which is the AI that almost every law enforcement agency in our country uses, and give it a 98.85% accuracy rating on a 12 million person photo. Meaning out of 12 million people, it could properly identify 99.85% of them. Showing us that if you stand on the negation of today's argument, you must realize that that facial recognition technology is beyond its preliminary stages. Additionally, I want to look back to that same study, in which they tell us that to correct the flaws that we may still see, further regulation is permitted and can help, because it is the fault of legislatures that we actually see it failing right now in the status quo. Don't give up on today's bill like you may give up on the problem on the math test. Pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. I repeat for the judges, 3 minutes and 7 seconds, 2-minute question period. Any and all questions, please. Representative.
Great speech, Representative. Now I want to clarify something you brought up during your speech. You said that predictive policing is already beyond its earlier stages, correct?
Correct.
And it's extraordinarily accurate in its findings, correct?
As I proved, yes.
So why are you standing in the affirmation of today's bill to ban predictive policing?
I misspoke.
I yield the rest of my time.
Representative Nahn.
Representative, you tell us we need regulation on facial software, correct?
Correct.
But where in today's legislation is it regulating? It's just an outright ban.
Correct. It is an outright ban. As I stated,
But
I
you said
misled for
you
this
need
piece of
regulation.
legislation. Yes, I meant to stand on negation.
I yield my time.
Representative Dadavarti.
Alright, so you outlined many benefits of facial recognition, and you did say that you stand on the negation. But, however, you also outlined that we do need regulation, correct?
Correct.
And does this bill outline any regulation as previous representative?
No, it's an
notes?
entire ban.
How's that helping our country if it's just banning it instead of being regulated?
It's not going to be, which is why I support negating it.
Alright. There's still 2 whole question blocks. Would any representative like to take it? Alright. The chair will absorb the remaining time.
I thank the chair.
So, for that, would we still go to a negation speech?
Yes, we will go to a negation speech. My judges and I keep that in mind. We will discuss this during our brief recess in seconds.
Alright. Well, seeing as that was a speech in the first affirmation, we'll now look for a speech in the first negation. Any and all negative speakers, please rise. Representative Nahn, you have the floor on
Thank you,
those.
Hello everyone, this is Representative Zong. This is my first time speaking today, first time this session. Spelled Z-H-A-N-G, definitely last alphabetically. If I could just get a thumbs up from all those above me, I'll begin. What does the future of policing look like? How do we ensure the continued safety of Americans? And how do we ensure we're regulating AI in its growth? Well, here's what we need to do. First, I urge negation of today's bill because it fails to address the real benefits predictive policing can offer to communities everywhere. I like by starting to talk about what AI is able to offer to police. It's able to create a safe and efficient algorithm that allows them to quickly track people, which is critical with human trafficking cases. In fact, an April 2023 report from June Wu of Forbes magazine explains to us that human trafficking is now more prevalent than ever before. With the use of predictive policing, AI is able to identify common patterns that they notice within various people. And by tracking patterns in movement, they're able to track suspected victims and perpetrators of human trafficking. And oftentimes, those split seconds that AI is able to make a decision can be the difference between saving someone's life. So AI has numerous benefits in the actual usage of human trafficking. But it's not just human trafficking. As an April 30, 2024, as a February 2024 report from Biometrics Updates Chris Owens explains, biometric tracking, which is used in predictive policing, actually helps with kidnapping cases as well. By tracking faces, it helps, especially when you get an Amber Alert, it ensures that it surveils the local area to find the actual person. And this isn't just conjecture, because Canada's police force is already using this kind of technology and seeing extraordinary benefits across the board. So AI is extraordinarily beneficial in creating efficiency in our police forces, especially when we have police forces that are increasingly stretched thin. And that's the crisis that rural areas specifically are facing today. Not enough staffing, not enough detectives, not enough manpower to ensure the safety of communities. But predictive policing provides that necessary tool needed to protect citizens everywhere. Now, I'd like to end by addressing one critical point: bias in AI. And this is absolutely a relevant point. But when we ban predictive policing entirely, we ban all progress on it, halting it to a stop. What we need to do now instead is to focus on creating stricter regulations for AI and predictive policing, and use it as a way to create industry-wide change, not just in policing, but in every field. For this, I urge negation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. I repeat for the judges, 3 minutes and 5 seconds, 2-minute questioning period. Any and all questions, please rise. Representative Burkholder.
Hi, great speech. So at the end of your speech, you said it halts all progress. Is facial recognition used outside of police forces?
Absolutely, but when we halt it in predictive policing, what we do is halt all usage of AI in
But
that
when we use it in the
specific
status
realm.
quo, what are the rates of misuse?
So I don't have a statistic on the rates of misuse, but what I can tell you is that when we halt predictive policing as a whole, we halt the actual usage and benefits of AI.
But you
What we
just
should
agreed
be
that
doing
it's
instead is
sectors,
regulating
it's still
AI and helping that to improve all sectors, requiring regulations on the type of data used benefits
Representative
everyone.
Connell.
So, Representative, you agree that unregulated FRT can pose a bias threat to Americans, correct?
Absolutely, that's why we take this bill as an opportunity to create more regulation when we not pass.
Opportunity. So why shouldn't we pass this piece of legislation, regulate AI, and then only unban it when it's safe and unbiased for Americans?
That's a great question, because the reality is that when we ban it just like this, we eliminate all the great effects it has in human
Well,
trafficking.
yeah, you said
But what
it
we need to
creates
do
bias, right?
instead,
You
what
said
we
it
do
creates
instead
bias.
is use this as an opportunity to
Representative
drive for more
bias.
Right, so going
testing.
on the previous line of questioning, if we're just regulating AI, how does that stop the racial discrimination negatives that you just brought?
Yeah, so with regulating AI, what we can do with predictive policing is make sure, number one, it runs on more equitable data, so more types of data, so it has less
Right,
bias.
until it's
And by
further
doing
trained,
that,
wouldn't we still
by
be seeing
doing
racial
that,
discrimination?
that's how we ensure better benefits.
But until
When
it's
we
further
ban
trained,
it,
wouldn't we
we
still see the
simply
same
eliminate
racial
all benefits across the board that we're seeing right now with police forces actually using AI to incentivize more safety.
Representative Tofu.
Thank you. Hi, Representative. I want to expand upon your point on kidnapping. How
Absolutely.
many victims are saved by facial recognition annually?
Well, I don't have a particular statistic on that, but I can tell you that Canada's already seeing tremendous results, and it's being implemented right now.
Does Canada have any statistics about how many are being saved?
Absolutely. I believe it's about 50% of victims are being identified a lot quicker within a shorter time span, which is crucial for child kidnapping victims.
Is this the same for human trafficking cases as well?
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Human trafficking.
Representatives. The questioning period is elapsed.
I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Seeing as that was a speech in the first negation, we'll now move back to a speech in the second affirmation. Any and all affirmative speakers, please rise. Representative Sean.
I thank the chair. That's Representative Sharma, spelled S-H-A-R-M-A. If I could just have a thumbs up from all the judges when you all are ready, I'll be done. Is there anybody that's not ready? Perfect. If the police asked you to be part of a lineup, would you go along? Now, I know that I won't, and I don't assume that many of you would either. Here's the problem. In the state of Ohio, if you have a driver's license, then your face is part of a database where an untrained, unregulated, and ineffective AI decides if you be part of a next police investigation. How fun. First, affirm, because facial recognition technology puts innocent Americans in the sight of the law. Now, Representative Young, you came up here and told us that new facial recognition technologies are very accurate, boasting a 99.8% accuracy rating. Here's the problem. These tests that facial recognition technology companies tout are not accurate to real-world application. The ACLU explains it best this year that these tests conducted by the NIST do not represent the reality of usage of recognition technology in the real world, because in testing, they use paired data sets, meaning every photo in the database has a matching photo that's put into the system, but that just doesn't exist in the real world. But second, and more importantly, is that real-world photos that police use are not good photos. They're grainy CCTV photos. They're from off angles. They don't have good quality. And those both go to show that 99.8% accuracy rating is not accurate. In fact, Brookings finds in 2021 that sure, when in these tests, these technologies can have as low of a miss rate as 0.1%. However, what they find is that when they use images that mirror the real world, that miss rate can climb as high as 20%. If there's 40 people in this room and we assume that we all have driver's licenses, that means 8 of us will be falsely accused of a crime. Doesn't that sound nice? Pass this legislation to make sure Americans aren't put in the sight of the law. But second, this legislation, my second problem is that there is no regulation as to which facial recognition technology that police use. Because Brookings continues that it gets worse, that some AI technologies have miss rates as high as 50% when using photos that mirror the real world. Here's what happens. There is no obligation for law enforcement to use AIs that are actually accurate. Oftentimes, they just use whatever AI technology that they want. In fact, according to a 2021 report by BuzzFeed News, Clearwater AI, which you brought up, Representative Young, has been used by 1,803 publicly funded agencies all across America, except for Vermont. And here is the problem. The company boasts that they have an effectiveness rating of 99%, but BuzzFeed News continues that it's never been tested by an independent agency. In fact, police officers that have used this say that, quote, Clearwater doesn't seem to work well with the low-resolution photos and grainy surveillance footage that is so common in police work. Now, who would have seen that? Americans shouldn't live in perpetual fear of being put behind bars because of ineffective technology. Pass this legislation, regulate AI.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. I repeat for the judges, 3 minutes and 7 seconds, 1 minute questioning period. Any and all questioners, please rise. Representative, can you show me the plaque up there? Representative Young.
So you make it quote of a statistic from 2021, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, is it not true that technology advances?
It advances, and that's why we need to pass regulations after we pass the legislation.
If
and then when we
statistic from 2021, is it not true that technology could have advanced?
technology advances, but my ACLU study that says that the tests are not effective is from this year.
Okay, and also you mentioned a non-independent third party for Clearwater AI, but I specifically gave you an example that was from this year in a government agency.
That's from this year, but again, these tests are not effective. The
A
NIST
12 million
test,
person test is not effective.
it's not effective because the
Representative
pictures don't mirror the real world.
Representative, so you talk about the negative impacts of FRT in that it leads to false accusations.
Right.
But if we ban FRT, what do police departments depend on?
Okay, what I believe we need to do is ban it, make sure we put in place proper regulations,
What do
meaning
they
it's,
depend on if we ban FRT?
they use like witness statements if they're effective.
What's more accurate, eyewitness or FRT?
I think we should only rely on FRT when it's properly regulated. I
But
think
what's
it's
more
good.
accurate, eyewitness or FRT?
FRT in some cases, but not in the real world because of miss rates being high.
Questioning period is elapsed. All representatives.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, thank you. Seeing as that was a speech in the second affirmation, we'll now move on to a speech in the second negation. Any non-negation speakers, please rise. Representative Chan.
I thank the chair. That's Representative Chandran, spelled Chandran, speaking for the first time today on the negation. Any indication if you're ready for my PO, Farley, and judges, and I'll get started. Judges. All right. America loves its stories. From Disney princesses to superhero movies, we're in love with the idea of a happily ever after. But there's not always a happily ever after in policymaking. Lydell Grant, Lamar Johnson, and Antonio Mallet. That's just 3 names out of the thousands who can attest to that simple truth if we pass this bill today. It's because this bill writes a story scarier than any horror story that I ask you to strike down this policy. First, let's start with chapter 1. This bill is built on smoke and mirrors. Representative Sharma in the affirmative tried to sell the story of deeply flawed facial recognition tech. But I have one response. Welcome to 2024, where technology actually improves. Every single piece of evidence that they give you in this round is not recent enough to confidently pass this legislation. Here's why. According to a 2023 Security Industry Association report, false recognition errors come in 2 types. False negatives are harmless. False positives, on the other hand, are instances where the tech incorrectly matches one image with another. When the affirmative is going to bring up cases of people of color being misidentified, they're talking about false positive cases. However, they're talking about false positive cases here, which has improved from the status quo. Here comes the rising action. The most recent evidence in this round from the National Institute of Standards and Technology finds in its evaluation from 8 days ago that for the top 150 algorithms, false positive error rates at their very worst are still less than 1%, and at their average, undetectable across all demographics. And that's the underlying warrant behind the 98.5% accuracy rate that Representative Young provided you. And Representative Sharma, this study did include varying images of quality from the real world. Representative Sharma, the idea that facial recognition technology is still as deeply flawed as you make it out to be is just a far-fetched narrative. Again, Americans deserve to be protected by technologies that are the best. Americans deserve a chance at a happy ending. Don't let this bill be the plot twist that upends their lives. Second, let's turn the page to chapter 2. Smoke and mirrors are what will put innocent constituents behind bars if we pass. Now, Representative Sharma and Representative Panala in cross-examination told you that facial recognition should be banned until it gets regulated. But neither of them tells you what the identification alternative is if you ban facial recognition technology. That same 2023 SIA report explains that without facial recognition tech, police have to resort to their traditional methods of manually looking for matching images, or they have to depend on eyewitness accounts, which are far less accurate than facial recognition technology. In fact, the Innocence Project found in November of 2022 that eyewitness misidentification is the leading cause of known wrongful conviction, contributing to nearly 70% of wrongful convictions in the status quo. Representative Sharma and the entire affirmation. That is not equality. That is not equity. That is an atrocity. While we sit here on top of Capitol Hill, there will be innocent Americans sitting behind bars paying the price of this policy. It's easy to sit here and debate this legislation like it's just some abstract policy. But behind every name is a number. Behind every percentage point is a person. Behind every statistic is a story. A story that starts with injustice doesn't have to end with it. Before the clock strikes midnight, have some courage and write the right story for your constituents. Fail.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. I repeat for the judges, 3 minutes and 9 seconds. 1 minute questioning period. Any and all questions, please rise. Representative Sharp.
Are law enforcement obligated to use the most accurate FRT?
That can be solved by regulation.
By regulation after passing this legislation,
Again,
right?
the comparative here is that if you ban them, they have to switch to worse methods, such as manually looking through the database or eyewitness accounts, which are far worse.
But why should people be in fear of getting falsely accused?
That starts by, again, Representative, all your impacts are way more magnified when you force them to rely on eyewitness accounts.
Right now, because of a lack of regulation, police and law enforcement use inaccurate AI, right? Because they're not obligated, right?
If you ban this legislation, like the next questioning block, Representative Sharp.
Sure. So yeah, they're not obligated to take the best one.
Regulations can happen on either side of this debate.
No.
I'm telling you it's better on our side because on your side, they have to resort to like methods like resorting to eyewitness accounts or manually looking through the database.
On your side, it means people get falsely accused because it's inaccurate.
Again,
how is
I'm
that
telling
done?
you more innocent people will be put behind bars if you pass this legislation.
But innocent people get put behind bars because it's inaccurate
I'm
right
telling
now.
you that increases on your side.
Question period is elapsed. All representatives, please take your seat.
I think it's
Chair, thanks. Seeing as that was a speech in the second negation, will now look for a speech in the third affirmation. Any affirmative speakers, please rise. Representative.
Hi guys, my name is Representative Pinalla, speaking for the first time today, first time in the session, representing the 13th District of Ohio, sitting in seat 4 if that helps. If I get a nod, thumbs up for the phone, you guys are ready, that would be great. Alright. 7 years ago, when I started my congressional tenure, I thought America was a land of 300 million faces. Well, 7 years later, I'd argue that America isn't 300 distinct, disjointed pieces. It's a group of people connected by one idea, and that's the idea of safety. To protect the safety for every single American today, we have only one choice: to pass. Because first, facial recognition is not ready for America. Representative Starball told you that facial recognition technology, or FRT, poses a threat to America, but let me tell you that the issue isn't even with how inaccurate the technology is. According to former NYT police officer Joseph Courtier, police departments don't, quote, understand that FRT doesn't produce probable cause to arrest, but merely a lead. So they falsely incriminate anyone who the algorithm spits out. The problem isn't the recognition technology representatives. The problem is the PDs who don't know how to use it. Because Representative Chandra and I agree, the alternatives to FRT are worse. But no cop is going to throw someone in jail just because an eyewitness told them to. Almost every single cop would if FRT did. That's the comparative in today's discussion. It's about pretrial detention. Because for the 1% of Americans who erroneously face pretrial detention for a crime that they didn't commit, it isn't just a small statistic. Representative Chandran, I'll raise you 3 names of my own: Robert Williams, Michael Oliver, and N.G.R. Parks. Because of what facial recognition technology did to them, they lost the ability to earn wages for weeks. They lost the ability to see their families and spouses. They lost their ability to put food on the table. That's not an America that I'm proud of legislating, representatives. It's time that we have the ability to look out for representatives and have the ability to pass. Because second, America needs safety now and forever. So throughout this debate, we've brought up this idea of a temporary ban, where we ban the legislation, we regulate FRT, then we unban FRT. Here's why a temporary plan is the best way to go forward. Representative Zhang admitted in questioning with her that a biased AI system hurts Americans. Here's why we need a temporary ban system. Because right now, if there's one thing that this Congress is known for, it's that we are really gridlocked. So Representative Zhang, there's no guarantee that regulation gets passed after we ban. So here's what we do. We link regulating FRT to unbanning FRT. What that means is that the only way for FRT to ever exist in America under a temporary ban practice is if it's regulated. That ensures that every single American is protected. And that ensures that no one has to live under the fear of an AI falsely incriminating them. Because at the end of the day, justice may be blind. But that doesn't mean that this Congress needs to be blind to the potential that a temporary ban plan has. Because it may be 300 million faces representatives, but it's one ideal. For the safety of every American, you have one choice: to pass.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Our future the judges 3 minutes and 7 seconds. 1 minute questioning period. Any non-questioners, please rise. Representative Moore.
Hi there. So, how is facial recognition technology defined in today's list?
I'm sure you can send me the legislation.
Okay, so it's facial recognition technology shall be defined as any technology utilizing landmarking technology for future extraction. This includes skin texture analysis, thermal cameras, or any other biometric authentication software capable of identifying or verifying information about physical characteristics.
Sure.
So, does that include other things other than facial technology?
It may, but understand that when FRT is posing a threat to Americans and throwing them to pretrial
So
detention,
will
we
this
have to
bill
take
ban
action.
other technology used by
Right, it may, but when FRT poses a threat to Americans, we have to take a stand.
How
We have
is
to ban it.
eyewitness misidentification not worse if it leads to 70% of wrongful convictions in status?
Because police officers don't throw people in pretrial detention just
They're
based on
literally throwing them into
eyewitnesses.
pretrial detention if it's wrongfully convicted.
Right, so what they do right now is they use eyewitnesses along with other things. They use multiple things to throw people into pretrial detention.
I told
right
you
now, if we
eyewitness
don't
misidentification injection by itself has caused 70%
Right,
of it.
but they use more things than pretrial, they use more
It
things
doesn't
than
matter,
other
the
things.
alternative is that they're going to
No,
prison.
the alternative is they don't use one solution to
Questioning
throw
period has
Americans in
elapsed. All
jail. That's
representatives,
better.
please take your seats. Seeing as that was a speech in the third affirmation, we're now looking for a speech in the third negation. Any and all negative speakers, please rise. Representative.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Representative Tepfer. That's T-O-E-P-F-E-R for my judges in the back. Again, T-O-E-P-F-E-R. I'm going to leave that right up here so that you guys can see it. I'll go ahead and begin once all those are ready. Just a thumbs up would be great. Good. 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 Okay. Go ahead and begin. Two roads diverged in Yellowwood, and sorry I could not travel both. I looked down one as far as I could, and all I saw were red herrings. By passing this legislation, we are allowing ourselves to draw the red herring across the path. To my friends on the affirmation, this is about so much more than the distractions of incorrect incarcerizations, Representative Planala, or regulations, Representative Sharma, or even racial profiling, Representative Lasser. It's about maximizing safety. We do that by negating. We should not be asking ourselves to eliminate this technology entirely, but asking how to improve it. When we ask how to improve it, we not only combat kidnapping, but we also protect incarcerated health. So first, let's talk about how we combat kidnapping. Now, Representative Zong did a great job of laying the groundwork for it, but let me quantify her data with some numbers. Wired tells us that in 2019 alone, facial recognition solved 40,000 cases of child kidnappings, in which more than 9,000 children were found instantly and 10,000 traffickers were arrested. That's the impact of this legislation to my friends on the affirmation. When we pass, we prevent ourselves from saving 9,000 children annually. That's why your vote falls to the negation. And Representative Sharma, in your speech, you said that the 99.85% effectiveness levels was only based on a mere simulation. That's not true. Look to Freethink, which tells us on June 15th of 2022 that facial recognition IDs kids in real time, in real cases, Representative Sharma, with 99.85% accuracy. That's why we negate. These aren't simulations. This is real life. Like Representative Panala said, behind every percentage is a face. These faces are children who got to go home safe. I stand in the negation for them. I was not elected to sit in this here Congress to let our children suffer, which is why we negate. Don't let the red herrings of the affirmation distract you from the 40,000 lives that we can save. We negate. But the next reason we negate is because we save incarcerated health. I'm surprised to be the first person to bring this up because this is a crucial point. Facial recognition is used to combat diseases in prisons right now. ITRX Group tells us on February 16th that facial recognition can help diagnose rare genetic disorders and diseases. It also helps track mental health and behaviors in patients. This is what our US prisons are doing. Look to the Government Accountability Office, who tells us in 2021 that facial recognition was used to identify which inmates had COVID. And because it's technologically based, it meant that we could stop the spread of COVID-19. NCBI tells us that in 7 single diseases, we were able to stop the spread of disease in 12,557 cases with 95% effectiveness. Real examples, Representative Sharma. That's why we negate today, because not only do we combat the spread of disease in our already disease-ridden prisons, but we also can work to save children in our nation. Don't let our constituents suffer because of the red herrings of the negation. We fail.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. I repeat, 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Reminder to the chamber, please do not abuse this grace period. 1 minute questioning period. Any and all representatives, please rise. Representative Panala.
Hi. How many kidnappings would occur if we threw every single American in jail?
If we don't throw every single American in jail.
This is just a hypothetical question.
If we throw every single American in jail, then we subject our children to even worse things, which is why your vote falls to the nation.
Okay, no. Okay, so would it be 0 kidnappings because there's no?
If there's no citizens in the nation, then
right.
no,
So
there's
my
no
point
kidnappings.
is, how does over-incarceration help Americans, and how is low crime a justification? For
I'm really glad you brought that
over-incarceration?
up because we don't see over-incarceration.
I proved in my speech that we do.
Well, I've just proved to you in my
You
speech.
didn't talk anything about over-incarceration.
I talked about diseases.
Your source about the accuracy of testing was from June 15 of 2022. 2022.
Correct.
My source from the ACLU that says testing is not accurate to the real world was this year.
That's
By
right.
time, doesn't that show testing is ineffective?
Absolutely not, because I tell you that 40,000 lives were saved. If we
No,
were able to
I'm
save,
saying accuracy,
no,
not numbers.
Representative. I'm telling, accuracy and numbers are equivalent
No.
here. When we are able to save 40,000 citizens, those are real life
Right.
cases. That's
I'm not,
accuracy.
again, I'm not talking about numbers, I'm talking about
Question
I'm here to
accuracy.
stand
period
up for the
elapsed.
children.
All representatives, please take their seats.
I think the chair.
Chair, thank you. Seeing as that was a speech in the third negation, we'll now be looking for a speech in the fourth affirmation. Any and all affirmative speakers, please rise. Representative DuPaul, you stand on the podium.
I thank the chair. Hi, everyone. That's Representative DuPaul, spelled D-U-P-A-U-L. That's D-U-P-A-U-L. If you're ready to rock, I'm ready to roll. Thumbs up would be great. 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 Awesome, awesome. It's crazy to think that we live in a country where a black and white cop car means something different if you're black or white. It's crazy to think that we live in a country where we all stand under the same red, white, and blue flag, yet those colors don't protect people of different colors. But it's even crazier to think that this Congress supports programs that make those colors contrast, not complement each other. Don't let the negation color your judgment. Support this policy. First, let's address the crowning jewel of the negation. Representative Topher, Zhang, and Chandran all argue increased efficiency in aid in arrests. Here's the thing, even if FRT is increasing the amount or efficiency of arrests, it's arresting the wrong people. Now, Representative Sharma already debunked Representative Young's evidence, but he gave us a study saying the miss rate increases to 20%. In reality, it's so much worse. Business Insider in 2023 quantifies that Detroit's police department's facial recognition technology misidentified suspects 96% of the time. Representative Young, you wanted more recent data. There's one from 2023. Now, Representative Chandran, you gave us another controlled study from 8 days ago proving otherwise. But we could go band for band all day with controlled studies. We need to look to what's happening in practice. When we look to what's happening in the status quo, it's failing. Now back to Representative Zong. I'm willing to make a marginal trade-off for efficiency if it means the people we are arresting are actually guilty. Faster arrests means nothing if they're flawed. Efficiency should never outweigh errors. Second, beyond just being ineffective, facial recognition technology predicates itself on societal inequalities. So you pass this legislation to reduce racial profiling and discrimination in policing. Scientific American, in their 2023 analysis of police facial recognition technology, found that law enforcement agencies who use this technology wrongfully arrested more black and brown people because the tech wasn't trained enough on their skin color. When an algorithm only knows lighter skin tones and a person of color shows up and they don't know what to do with it, that's a huge problem. Now, I want to quantify the sheer volume of people it's affecting. Georgetown Law School and the Government Accountability Office in 2023 quantified that more than a quarter of all local and state police forces and almost half of all federal police law enforcement agencies regularly access facial recognition systems. So Representative Chandran, you champion justice, but how can we have justice when millions of people are subjected to prosecution because technology can't tell their skin color apart? That's millions of people put behind four walls in iron bars because our technology is failing. A chance for innovation should never outweigh the right to freedom. That's why an outright ban is right. Affirm so the red on our flag presents bravery, and our people can
Thank
be
you,
protected
Representative, for
as
that
one.
speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. I repeat, 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Another reminder to the chamber, please do not abuse this grace period as it is called a grace period for a reason.
So
1 minute
sorry.
questioning period, any and all representatives, please rise. Representative Zong.
Great to
Hi,
hear,
thank you.
Representative. So let's talk a little bit about what you said about the AI being biased because it's not trained on
Correct,
enough
correct.
data, correct?
Yes.
All right, so why don't we just train that AI on more types of data to eliminate that bias?
We've come over this argument time and time again. We've tried training these algorithms over and over again, and it's still not working.
Okay, so what
When
happens
those
when we don't
algorithms
have
are
AI?
denying,
We have to switch to eyewitness interviews, right?
we can still find justice
And that means we have more
uphold
human
justice.
bias within the entire system.
No, we see that it
Thank you. Hi, Representative.
misidentifies
The source I
suspects.
gave you from Wired says that 10,000 traffickers were correctly identified and arrested. How can
Yeah.
you make this grandiose claim that we're incorrectly arresting people?
Because on net, you gave us one number. You don't give us that proportionally. Proportionally, 96% of the time, it fails. I don't care if it
So putting
arrests
kidnappers in jail isn't
10,000.
enough for you?
It is, but we can
Okay.
do that with people.
Okay.
But when it's putting more innocent people behind bars, that's not something we can stand for.
Okay, I'll move on. So you said the chance for innovation is not stopped.
Questioning period is the last call. Representative, please take.
I thank the chair.
Chair thanks you. Seeing as that was a speech in the fourth affirmation, we'll now move on to a speech in the fourth negation. Any non-negative speakers, please rise. Representative Moore.
I thank the chair. Hello, my name is Representative Moore. This is my first time speaking today, first time in this legislative session. I'll begin shortly after I get a thumbs up from my penal parliament judges and button my suit jacket. It takes me a second sometimes. There once was a frog who wanted to cross the Nile. His only way across was to ride in a crocodile's mouth. And of course, halfway across, the crocodile shut its jaws, swallowing the frog whole. In today's debate, this legislation is the crocodile and our constituents the frog, and thus we fail. We fail first for banning essential police technology. According to Section 2 of today's legislation, facial recognition technology is defined as utilizing landmark methodology for future extraction, including skin texture analysis. And the Office of Justice Programs 2023 tells us that fingerprint tech uses the same landmark methodology and texture analysis technology. So under today's legislation, we are banning fingerprint technology, something that is very important for police work as a whole. And Representative Panala, today's legislation will ban that fingerprint technology so far that the FBI in 2018 tells us that we will be missing the answer to 7,008 cases annually. So if we ban this fingerprint technology when we pass today's legislation, we see that we are going to lower the amount of cases solved, and that is going to hurt our entire constituency. Because crime rates will only rise in unsolved cases as well. And so you fail. Which brings me to my second point of contention, the security of this nation's border. According to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, facial recognition has helped ensure that documents provided at the border are accurate. And furthermore, the New York Times in 2023 tells us that the Border Protection Agency was able to document 300 million immigrants and caught 1,900 from using someone else's passport due to facial recognition technology. So facial recognition technology is being used at the border to make sure that our nation is secure. And Representative Sharma, it is clear that it works in the status quo despite the misrates you bring up in your speech. It actively secures the border. And furthermore, the Cato Institute tells us these misrates get easily solved when in 90% of those cases, a human being walks up and examines the evidence to make sure that the AI was accurate. So Representative Sharma and Representative DuPaul, these misrates don't mean anything because it is clear that humans see what is going on. They make sure that the AI is accurate in its analysis to make sure misrates go down. So when we secure the border and we ban essential technology, when the AI secures the border and this legislation bans essential police technology, we see that there is only one way for today's debate to go, the side of the negation. So instead of becoming that crocodile and allowing us to eat our constituents, we must build a bridge and cross the Nile together. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 2 minutes and 59 seconds. I repeat for the judges, 2 minutes and 59 seconds. 1 minute question period. Any and all questions, please rise. Representative DuPaul.
You tell us these misrates don't mean anything. But when we see this technology being used, increasing the amount of wrongful arrests of black and brown people, how can it mean nothing?
Wrongful arrests that end in the solvency of a human being go, oh, the AI did something wrong here, and then they're released.
No, we see these wrongful arrests.
90% of cases, Representative. That's what I stated in my speech. 90%
No, we
of
see a
cases.
96% misidentification, and that is followed through the arrest period. That's why we see
So the
higher
arrest
rates
period of
incarceration.
2 days at most, when they arrest them and put them in a holding cell and
Even
then
s-
view the research and go,
Even
oh,
still,
it's
why
wrong.
should we be supporting
Let's take
technology
your
that does
90%
it?
as your higher ground.
Yes. How can you justify locking 10% off of 10% of black and brown cases into pretrial detentions for months without being able to provide anything for the
So
family?
the only reason that I'm okay doing that is because it stops many people.
Yeah, it stops many people
violent crimes.
over incarceration, right?
No,
What
it stops
do you mean?
many.
If it
So
incarcerates more people,
yeah, so I agree that we need more regulation. But
okay.
in 90% of
So we
cases,
should
then
unban,
those misrates
regulate,
don't happen. No,
Right.
we shouldn't ban
And
it. Just
justifying
because.
over incarceration, Representative.
No.
Questioning period is elapsed. All representatives, please proceed.
I think the chair.
Chair, thanks. Seeing as that was a speech in the fourth negation, we'll now move on to a speech in the fifth affirmation. Any and all affirmative speakers, please rise. Representative Burkholder, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. Hello, everybody. My name is Representative Burkholder, speaking for the first time in this final session.
Observers, please stop talking in the round.
Thank you. Real quick, could my judges just give some sort of indication so I know who you guys are, because there's a lot of people in. Thank you guys so much. Now, are you guys all ready? Oh, perfect. Go, Farley. In season 5, episode 4 of Netflix drama Better Call Saul, Saul Goodman stands in a courtroom and asks the witness to please identify the defendant. When the witness confidently lifts up his arm, points and said, "It's him," to the guy sitting next to Mr. Goodman. But to the jury and everybody in the courtroom's surprise, he was completely wrong. The defendant was actually sitting in the way back of the courtroom. Now, that's exactly what our facial recognition systems do. They misidentify our constituents. They falsely accuse our constituents. That's why you pass today. But first, pass because facial recognition has high rates of false positives. Now, this is common ground for every affirmation speaker that's given a speech today. But allow me to be the first to explain specifically how these systems work. PXL Vision writes that the most common type of algorithm used for facial recognition is a deep convolutional neural network, CNN. And augmented AI furthers that CNNs have several limitations. The biggest one, it requires large amounts of data to be trained effectively and to be used efficiently. Now, I don't know about everybody in this room, but I don't want my constituents to be lab rats so that we can find new technology. That's why you passed today. But in other words, moving on. A study conducted by the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology concludes that algorithms developed in the United States were all consistently bad at matching Asian, African American, and Native American cases by a factor of 10 to 100. In other words, they're more likely to find a match when there isn't one. More common with minorities. The use of facial recognition systems is growing rapidly in law enforcement. Academic studies have already proved that it misidentifies our constituents, along with every other speaker so far in the affirmation. But they've all proved this, so now let's look at the two impacts. First, an undercut in public trust for law enforcement. Office of Justice Program explains that wrongful convictions undermine the confidence our nation has in our own criminal justice system, often leading to questions about the fairness of the system. Wrongful convictions result in wrongful liberty, where individuals who truly committed the crimes are free to victimize others. When people don't trust our law enforcement, this leads me to yet another impact. Crimes remain unsolved. Now, Representative Moore and I agree on this situation, but it's actually worse on the negation. As the Legal Defense Fund finds, that when no one trusts the judicial system, no one will provide a tip or report of a neighbor's wrongdoing if they don't trust the officers who patrol their community. Without those tips, law enforcement can't clear cases. Serial lawbreakers continue tormenting communities, and crime rates go up. Representative Moore, that's the impact on the status quo. When people don't trust our police, they're not going to report the cases. They're not even going to be investigated, let alone solved. Now, after Mr. Goodman pulled this ridiculous stunt in the courtroom, he was met with some objection from the prosecutor and some backlash in the judges' quarters. Let's object to this system today. Object to this system, ban it from our nation, and pass this legislation.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 3 seconds. I repeat for the judges, 3 minutes and 3 seconds. 1 minute question period. Any and all questions, please rise. Representative Koff.
Hi, Representative. So you seem to have statistics that show that these AI systems are discriminatory, but the negation seems to have statistics that contradict that.
Right.
Why should we trust your statistics over theirs?
So prefer my evidence and Representative Dubois, I'd like to highlight his evidence, the 96% misuse, and that was specifically in a study conducted in Detroit. These systems have been used, they've been tested. The tests have shown Representative Dupaul's 96% misuse and my factor of 10 to 100 misuse based on minorities.
Right, but
I hope
couldn't
that
the
answers your
negation
question.
give me that same spiel, but for their side? So why should we really trust yours?
Representative Young.
So you mentioned a lack of trust in police. This sounds like more of a societal issue than it really does to do with automation.
Right, the reason it's a societal issue right now is because of misidentifications. That's perpetuated on the negation.
Okay, and how exactly is that perpetuated?
For every piece of evidence that the affirmation has already given you, that these misidentified people at high rates.
Okay, but when officers misidentified people at higher rates?
Oh, can you repeat your question, sorry?
Would officers in person misidentify at higher rates?
Not necessarily. I don't think they can be higher than 96% that Representative Paul gave us.
Question period is elapsed. All representatives, please take your seat.
I thank the chair.
Chair, thanks you. Seeing as that was a speech in the fifth affirmation, we'll now move on to a speech in the fifth negation. Any non-negation speakers, please rise. Representative Peace.
I thank the chair. For my judges, my name is Representative Peace. That's spelled P-E-A-S-E. I'm seated in seat 12. And as always, since I'm at the leisure of all those above me, I will happily begin with a signal of readiness. Representatives, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I loved playing the game Where's Waldo? But you can't immediately tell where he is. That's the fun of it. But when the fun of the game becomes failing your constituents because you cannot serve and protect them, we must negate in today's debate. On the affirmation, Representative Sharma discussed how facial recognition technology tests do not mimic the real world. Yet, Innovetrix tells us that in August 2023, that our police can enlarge photos and use anti-blurring technology to eliminate this discrepancy in our facial recognition technology. And even with this, the Security Industry Association tells us that the top 150 algorithms are over 99% accurate. Now, Representative Panala spoke that there is no regulation promised if we fail today's legislation, but he ignores what stares us in the face. Directive 026-11 from the Department of Homeland Security ensures that facial recognition technology in their organization is subject to extensive oversight and must be thoroughly tested to avoid bias. To further disprove this lie pushed by the affirmation, we look to NYPD Inspector Joseph Cortesi, who reports that in the process of using FRT, human review and investigation is required. Facial recognition, he says, does not produce probable cause for arrest. It merely leads to an investigation, like Representative Moore alluded to in his speech. Representative DuPaul and Panala, you say this Detroit report is a clear reason to affirm today. However, the Detroit police chief in that Innocence Project report says himself that if the officers were to use facial recognition and only facial recognition, it would yield high misidentifications. However, that police chief says that officers aren't using this technology by itself. That 96% statistic falls flat because it isn't the reality. This system of misidentification is not solely a problem with this tech, it's a problem that takes systemic change in favor of using all tools at our disposal. Now, one of those tools is paramount for today's debate, which is why it surprises me that no other speaker before me has brought it up. In Section 2 of this legislation, we ban police use of thermal cameras, which the Department of Homeland Security reports thermal imagery helps police locate search subjects from lost children to dangerous fugitives, while exhibiting none of the bias that the affirmation champions today, which leads my harmless game of Where's Waldo to a dangerous search for police tools. Negate.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. I repeat for the judges, 3 minutes and 9 seconds, 1 minute questioning period. Any all questions, please rise. Representative DuPaul.
If the very foundation of an investigation is based in a false recognition, and suspects culturally, and specifically suspects of cultural, are assumed guilty before innocent, how can they find justice?
So as I stated in my speech, Representative, this doesn't necessarily assume that suspects are guilty based on a false identification. It merely leads to an investigation by our police.
Right, an investigation that is founded in a false identification. If a machine spits out a face of a black American, assume police are going to assume they are guilty.
Right, Representative, who is a police more likely to believe? A human or a highly, intelligent software?
Well, as we see in the status quo, they can use both as tools in
Right,
an
but who are they
investigation.
most likely going to believe? Software or a human?
I can't speak necessarily for who a police officer is more likely to believe, but
Is
what's
it true that
important
it
to
is
this
possible that they
debate,
could believe the software more?
it is, of course it's
If
possible,
they,
but it's also
the
possible
software
that they believe the human.
misidentifies these people and they believe it.
Which is why we have an
more than the human.
investigation
Is it
process
not
after
true that
running
you
the
guys
facial
just
recognition.
All representatives, please take your
I thank the chair.
Thanks you. Seeing as how they speech in the fifth negation, we now move on to a speech in the sixth affirmation. Any and all affirmative speakers, please rise. Representative Gadavarty.
I thank the chair for the judges. My name is Representative Gadavarty. That is spelled Godavarthi. This is my first time speaking today, first time speaking this legislative session. With an indication or nod, with all those voting, I shall begin. And also, can I see who my judges are? Just give me a thumbs up. Or... If America was a soldier, facial recognition technology is a gun wound. This bill cauterizes that gun wound. Today you affirm because of the inaccuracy outlined by Representative DuPaul and Representative Burkholder, and because America does not need to bleed. Facial recognition is inherently racist. Now, even I found it funny that a software can be racist. But in all seriousness, Representative Chandran outlines that this facial recognition is accurate. But let's look at why that is false. The Washington Post outlines in December of 2023 that facial recognition software misidentified people of color 100 times more than those of the Caucasian race. This stat not only applies to those, but Muslims and Asians all across America. It is inaccurate, Representative Young. It is inherently discriminatory. Native Americans were having the highest amount of false positives. It could not identify a Native American man as a human. The inaccuracy is just mind-boggling. In 2020, Robert Williams was arrested for allegedly stealing thousands of dollars of merchandise. But in Robert Williams' own words, it's dangerous when it works. It's even more dangerous when it doesn't. The harms of facial recognitions just don't end there. The ban has already started. The Electronic Frontiers Foundation shows that 17 states have already taken action on this, some of these states being California and Massachusetts. The reason? Inaccuracy. Even in 2024, the accuracy of these softwares are not good, regardless of the small percentage. Moreover, representatives, when a survey by the Pew Research Center says that 65% of all Americans fear this technology, we affirm today's legislation. We are a Congress, we represent our constituency. We don't act on their fear. Representative Chandran, or Representative Panala was trying to tell you before, is that a police officer is much more likely to arrest someone off of facial recognition technology rather than a witness statement. This can even be quantified by the APA. The law enforcement was much more likely to believe machines and the software rather than humans. Just because my nose was bleeding earlier doesn't mean America should bleed. Cauterize the wound. Affirm this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 2 minutes and 52 seconds. I repeat for the judges, 2 minutes and 52 seconds. 1 minute questioning period. Any and all questions, please rise. Representative Chandler.
I preempt this whole inaccuracy argument with the most recent evaluation of this round and found that false positive rates are less than 1% across all demographics. Why are we restricting Americans from being protected with this tech?
Right, so I'm not restricting Americans from being protected with this tech. What I'm saying is that the regulations are just not there. Moreover,
Why don't
law
we regulate
enforcement,
instead of banning?
right. So law enforcement are underfunded. That is a true fact, meaning they will cheap out on this
That doesn't
technology.
have any real relevance
The
to
highest-
legislation.
Your
Why do we
statistic
regulate?
only applies to those of the highest technology available,
Why don't we
not
pay
those
more
of the
law
medium.
enforcement?
Hi, Representative. So you talked about how we lack regulations on these facial recognition technology, correct?
Sure.
I gave you a story from the Department of Homeland Security about these strong regulations of their technology in this organization. How can you say we don't have regulations when I just
Right.
gave you regulations?
What I'm saying is we don't have enough regulations on law enforcement agencies to make sure these are
what would be
technologies that are
enough?
being
I gave you an
used.
example in NYPD and our federal DHS.
Right, but regardless, misidentifications happen,
According to Representative Sharkey,
incarcerations
it's
happen.
1%.
All representatives, please take your seats.
I thank the chair.
Motion?
Motion recognized.
Seeing a natural break in debate, recess until 3:25.
3:25. Any seconds?
Second.
Any objection? Seeing none, we'll now recess.
One moment, I have a few observers that I would like to not see return after the recess due to some disruptive behavior during round. Red tie, green tie, plaid shirt, gray jacket, you two. My judges, did you catch any behaviors that I didn't point out?
Those two were talking to each other.
You two?
Yeah.
Okay, please don't return after recess.
Did you
See you in 15. Judges will count speeches. Please don't forget to give Representative Reddy a speech for his PO trip. Thank you.
Thank you all for letting me be your PO.
I'm getting it first.
True ball. True ball. This is
Come on now.
This space open? Do you mind leaving this space open?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Not a lot of space is available,
I'm actually genius. I'm actually so
That's why
There was an Amber Alert in the middle of the round. Every single person's phone except mine went off because I had mine on Do Not Disturb.
not that part.
Where did I get this? Yeah, that was cool. I actually international research.
Okay, I was just asking, but I
Initially, and then I mentioned that there was a meeting with that reset schedule.
Okay.
We just, yeah, I did change it.
This is the gavel we're going to borrow. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Oh, about how I got them.
7th and the what? 7th and the what?
7th in the name.
Oh, okay, alright, that's what I was
Thank you very much.
I would know this.
It's four judges, right?
There's actually 6 of us.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. 7 with you.
So OSDA guidelines are basically outside of the school minus 3 point deduction. So whatever you intended on making that, if you don't, because there's a person, she just makes it all. Oh, back there. Hi, I will.
Awesome.
Our recess does not officially end until 3:25.
Yep. Are all the judges back though? Because if they are, I can go over my procedures.
I think one should probably wait until.
Wait for the They might have some questions, so let's check.
Everyone's back now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is it okay if we close the door?
Yes, can we close the door?
It's all, everyone's here. Perfect. Hi, my name is Representative Moore. Thank you so much for allowing me to be one of your presiding officers today. Let's just go over a couple procedures first, and then I have some important announcements to get. So first, for speeches, I'll do 1 tap at 2 minutes, I'll do 2 taps at 2:30, and I'll do 3 taps at 2:55. Then we'll get to 3:05, I'll begin to gavel you down, it'll get real loud, and then at 3:10, I'll cut you off verbally and we move right to questioning. For questioning, I'll give like a tiny tap at 20 seconds, and then I'll move on to the next questioner at 30. Any questions about that stuff? No. Please don't preface, we all know what it is, everything defined, everything like that. Pretty regular. Any questions about that? Okay, just make sure. No back and forth question. I'll be very strict about that as soon as we get the first one. So if you have a back and forth question, I'll give you a verbal warning. Second time, I'll give you a second warning. I don't really know how to go from there because it's never happened before. So please don't do it. All right, any questions about any of that stuff? Okay, time for important announcements. Observers, please don't talk. Please. Like it's important today. Please don't talk. Don't be on your phones. That kind of stuff. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. All right. So, I think we're good to go. Chair seeks a motion.
Motion. Motion to resume debate?
Seconds? Second. Opposition? Seeing none, that motion does carry. We'll now resume debate on piece of legislation, predictive policing. I don't remember which one it is. Predictive policing. We ended off on a ask speech, correct?
Yes, exactly.
All right. So we will now move to a negation speech. All such speakers, please rise now. Representative Balmarugan, you stand unopposed.
This is Representative Balmarugan, spelled B-A-L-A-N-U-R-U-G-A-N. Usually, I'll tell the judges to just pick the longest name they see, but I think Representative Gobarthi has me beat there. Anyone's not ready, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll gladly begin. In May of 2019, Jennifer Dulos would be kidnapped and murdered, and her body would never be discovered again. To this day, that crime remains unsolved. But behind that atrocity was a victim's face that went unseen, a victim's voice that went unheard, and a victim's pain that went unfelt. Even a single story like this is one too many. The last thing we need is more of them. First, let's analyze the root arguments of the affirmative. Every affirmation speaker opposes FRT on the faulty assumption that it's inherently racist. But let's take a look at the underlying mechanics of FRT. FRT works by transforming images into mathematical expressions that can then be compared to determine the degree of similarity between two separate images. But the mathematical expression that's at the root of the entire process is based on how you train the machine initially. What does that mean? Representative Sharma and Dupal, it means that the discrepancies in the quality of FRT is not merely due to the technology itself, but also due to the images it learns from. You give us a study from the ACLU and jump to the conclusion that FRT is discriminatory. But scroll down on that same study where the authors themselves tell you that the bias is due to a lack of minority photos in the dataset that the machine is learning from. By simply using a better dataset, all of your concerns about discrimination are put to rest. In fact, Representative Young, the sponsor of this legislation, admits that a properly trained algorithm identifies faces accurately 99.8% of the time with an undetectable bias towards race or gender. Even when it's tested on real-life photos. Representative Sharma and Panala, if bias is non-existent, it's preposterous to ban a technology over an issue that doesn't even exist. Representative Dupal, Burkholder, Sharma, and Panala all present edge cases where people are falsely accused of crime.
But understand that if you ban FRT entirely, you shift the burden of identifying criminals onto eyewitnesses, a process that's vastly more inaccurate. In fact, Georgetown University explained in December of 2022 that eyewitnesses misidentify faces up to 60% of the time, making it 300 times less accurate than FRT. Representative Sharma, Panala, DuPaul, and Burkholder, you're worried about Americans being falsely accused of crimes, but your policy only exacerbates that issue. Your impacts swap to the negation. At the end of this debate, the only thing the affirmation ends up accomplishing is hampering our nation's crime-fighting abilities. The impacts of Representatives Zong and Topher have gone untouched. By stripping our departments of the most effective way of identifying criminals, we unleash crime and impunity onto our streets. A vote for the affirmative is a vote for unsolved violent crime, unhindered gang violence, and unhampered human trafficking. But behind every crime, there's a face of a victim. Don't let anyone's go unseen.
Thank you, Representative. For that speech, 2 minutes and 59 seconds. I repeat the judges, 2 minutes, 59 seconds. 1 minute question period. Commissioners, please rise now. That'll go to Representative Paul.
When comparatively departments that use FRT have more wrongful arrests than those that use eyewitnesses, why should we use FRT over eyewitnesses?
Your entire argument is based on the flawed actions of police departments. It's not a flaw with FRT, it's a flaw with how police departments have been using FRT. By simply passing policy to change the way they use it, we alleviate all the issues without banning it.
But today's legislation does none of that, or your advocacy does none of that.
No, we have a much better solution in place. If FRT programs are already effective,
FRT
and the
has been
only issue
inherently
is how
inactive.
police is using it.
Are FRTs required to use properly trained algorithms right now?
If we pass future legislation, they will.
Right, so we should pass the legislation to...
Not
put in
this
place-
legislation.
But under your policy, then in the interim, people will be discriminated. Under my plan, wouldn't people be safe in the interim?
We don't have to ban FRT to change FRT. We can keep it legal while changing it.
Before your bill is passed, people will be discriminated against, right?
No.
We don't.
But most police departments are using it effectively. Like every single scenario you've given is when police departments.
Unfortunately, the questioning period has elapsed. This week, to proceed. All right, seeing as that was a speech and mitigation, the chair seeks speech and affirmation. Also, speakers, please rise now. Representative Anand, you stand at opposed.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everyone. My name is Representative Anand, spelled A-N-A-N-D. I do have a bit of a cough, so if you'll please excuse me. With a thumbs up and a sign of invitation, I'll gladly begin. Okay, President back. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed because not one, not two, not three, but 5 people decided to speak on negation of today's legislation. And actually, 6 decided to speak, 1 more than the person who planned. I'm disappointed because you all champion disproportionately hurting our constituents. You champion racism. Make me proud. Pass this legislation. Now, Representative Tepfer tells us we need to maximize positive impact. The only way for us to do that is by passing today's legislation. I want to introduce Cyto AI Scan, a program capable of identifying cancer cells with almost 100% accuracy. But it originally wasn't intended for such. It originally was Bakery Scan, used to identify pastries. You see, I'm a negation speaker, and I'm telling you, AI is a good thing, and I like AI. But if we hold Representative Chungren to his highest ground, he says less than 1% of all is misdiagnosed. I tell you, until that number is 100% correct, we cannot fail today's legislation and allow it to continue. I like AI, but I'll like it even more if we fail today's legislation. Now, Representative Zong tells you we need more data, and Representative Balamarugan says we need more data also, and he says this is math. But along with math, it's AI, and AI learns 1 at a time. So, we need better data. I'll tell you how we get better data. The Marshall Project in April 2023 tells us that dozens of cities use facial recognition software for more amounts than police actually uses them. And when there's more data, AI gets better. And when it gets better at accurately in identifying things to help our constituents with, only then can we correctly use AI in our country. We must fail today's legislation because it doesn't matter who we impact, it matters how we impact them. And I'll tell you how that happens. Representative Tepfer, you tell us about the impacts at the border. I'll tell you the exact same thing. You tell us how this saves 10,000 lives at our border. I'll tell you how it disproportionately affects thousands more. The Human Rights Watch tells us in September 2023 that marginalized communities are hit the hardest. Previous representatives have touched upon this, but I want to touch upon it one last time to close it once and for all, Representative Bala-Marugan. This, in our border, indiscriminately searches for one single race, Mexicans. Representative DuPaul tells you about black and white. I tell you about brown. Brown like myself, brown like my family, and brown like thousands and millions of constituents in our country. Our country needs an effective solution. And until that number can be 100%, Representative Chundran, we cannot fail today's legislation. You pass for our people. I'm ready to pass. Are you?
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes on the dot. I agree with the judges, 3 minutes on the dot. 1 minute questioning period. Questions please right now. That'll go to Representative East.
Representative, you speak about maximizing positive impact in today's debate. I have a simple question for you. What positive impact do we get by banning thermal imaging cameras?
Because the thing, thermal imaging cameras are not always accurate.
Do you have a statistic that shows that?
I don't, but I can guarantee
So
that.
I showed you in my speech that these help police track down fugitives and lost children. So if you don't
I
have a
believe thermal
statistic,
imaging can be inaccurate because it
it
looks for
can be
heat.
inaccurate, but you
Right.
don't know if it is.
It looks for heat, and heat can be generated by a lot of things, including animals and humans who aren't actually
Yes,
doing
but
bad
it's police
things.
officers that are using.
Great speech, Representative.
Thank you.
Now, you just told us that data gets better when we train it more on our AI, right? So AI gets better when we use more data cases, right?
Absolutely.
So when we ban predictive policing, when we ban the use of this data, when we ban the use of this AI, how is that going to help it improve?
I'm very glad you brought that up. So when I tell you that multiple cities across our country use
So we're
AI,
stifling growth within predictive
absolutely
policing,
not.
correct?
Cities use more. AI.
So that's cities, not police forces, correct?
They analyze
Unfortunately, the
more
question
net
period has
people.
elapsed.
When they
The speaker may now
analyze,
take their seat.
I thank the chair.
Just as well. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, the chair now seeks a speech in the negation. All such speakers please rise now. All right, seeing none, the chair will unilaterally move to a speech in the affirmation. The chair now seeks a speech in the affirmation. All such speakers please rise now.
Motion.
Oh, okay. Perfect. You were so perfect.
Thank the chair for the judges. I'm Representative Reddy. Representative Reddy, spelled R-E-D-D-Y, seated in, I believe, seat 8, speaking for first time today, second if you count my PO session. Any indication, I'll gladly begin.
I'm sorry, you accepted a speech in affirmation or negation?
I'm in affirmation.
Oh, I lost track.
Thank you. In the novel 1984, Winston lives in a society where the government controls everything. And police officers brutally beat anyone who goes against the government. In today's society, FRT represents the government. And our police forces are brutally beating individuals because of FRT. So pass today's legislation. Principally, pass today's legislation to promote racial and social equality. Now, many representatives in the affirmation have brought this up, but I want to be the first representative on my side to actually show how passing today's legislation decreases deaths amongst minorities. Now, Harvard University states that there's a 31% error in gender classification for dark-skinned females. And ACLU states that 28 members of Congress who were disproportionately members of color were incorrectly matched with their mugshot images. So in the status quo, police officers are misdirected towards minorities. And that leads to statistics like the ones I'm about to bring up. Berkeley states that unarmed black people are twice as likely to be killed as unarmed white people. And University of Michigan Law School states that black people have a much higher chance of being wrongfully convicted of a crime than a white person. So basically, in the status quo, FRT is leading our police officers towards these minority communities. And when they get led to these minority communities, you see an increase in deaths amongst those minority communities. That's why you passed today's legislation. Because I don't stand for the death of any of my constituents. and neither should any of you. But secondarily, pass today's legislation because it inflicts upon our constituents' rights. And let me be the first representative to show how FRT is an infliction upon our constituents' rights. Harvard states that facial recognition was used to harass journalists, and facial recognition poses a threat to privacy and our constituents' civil liberties. So FRT in the status quo is suffocating our constituents, just like the government did to Winston in 1984. And Brookings states that in 2015, the Baltimore Police Department reportedly used aerial surveillance, location tracking, and FRT to identify people who publicly protested against the death of Fred Gray. Our constituents have a constitutional right to protest, and anyone in the negation of today's legislation wants our constituents to not have that constitutional right. FRT is a problem, representatives, so pass today for a better tomorrow.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 2 seconds. I approve the judges 3 minutes, 2 seconds, 1 minute questioning period. Questions being posed now. Representative Young.
What individual privacy rights are going to be restricted if we don't pass this legislation?
What individual privacy rights?
Yes.
Right, so basically like FRT is being used in the wrong ways as it's harassing our...
Right, in the wrong ways. Is there not regulations we can pass to fix those wrong ways?
Right, so what we should be doing right now is pass today's legislation, then implement the regulations that you want
How
to
can we
make
be sure we can ever actually unban FRTs?
Right, so we're also, like, in the status quo, what we're also experiencing is the harassments, and we need to get rid of that immediately.
Representative Chandra?
Hey, Representative, like, why should we force police departments to start using eyewitness misidentification, which will hurt these very constituents that you advocated for in your speech?
Right, so FRT is actually hurting them more because it's...
How is it hurting them more if eyewitness misidentification has a far greater inaccuracy rate?
Right, so other representatives have already disproved that with statistics, but on a logical standpoint, what you see is that when you get rid of FRT with today's legislation, we fix the problems with FRT, then re-implement.
Can be solved by
Unfortunately, the question period has elapsed. The speaker may not take this.
I think the chair.
Permission to address the chamber?
Granted.
Does anybody else plan on speaking on this bill? Okay.
Motion?
Yeah.
Motion to move the previous question?
Second?
Second.
Any in opposition? Seeing none, the motion is carried. We'll now move to this question on the predictive policing. Right here in blue. All right. So, all those in favor of this legislation, raise your placard now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right. Negation of that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Abstentions? 0. Sweet. All right, so a vote from 9 to 6, that bill does pass. Congratulations to the author of the here. All right, that means we will now move on to debate for piece of legislation. It's the misdemeanor one. Bill to omit misdemeanors from criminal background checks to decrease the rate of recidivism. Okay. Would the judge like me to read that? Because I can grab it real quick. No, good. Perfect. So, seeing that, the chair now seeks a first affirmative or sponsorship speech. Need all the speakers to press now. Representative Coe.
I thank the chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Representative Coe. I guess it's not really the morning anymore. This is my first time speaking today and first time speaking this session. And if everybody's ready, we'll just give you an invitation. It's Koth, K-O-T-H. Judges, there's a lot of it back there. Okay, perfect. Representatives, this bill is a step toward a greater equality, where we don't judge people by their long gone past, but by their current character. This bill will not only do what it set out to do and decrease recidivism rates, but it will also substantially improve our economy. Let me explain why. The Cato Institute describes some basic underlying facts about our present situation. 64% of unemployed men have a criminal record. And that doesn't only apply to low-skilled labor, because 30 states in our country have strict laws limiting the amount of license that people with a criminal history can get. This hurts our employment. And just look to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to see its effects. Our current job shortage crisis, which was exacerbated by COVID-19, is largely due to people being unqualified for the jobs that they're applying for. One of the main ways that you get your qualifications is through licensing. And when we have 30 of our states with strict licensing laws and disallowing our constituents from applying to these jobs, we only exacerbate and increase this unemployment crisis. And this is visualized in multiple states. According to a study from the Arizona State University, states with high restrictions saw a 10% increase in recidivism rates. That is contrasted with states that had low restrictions, who saw a decrease by 4.2% in recidivism rates. Allowing less restrictions helps our constituents stay out of prison. It helps relieve our justice system. It helps relieve our citizens. And not only that, but a study by the University of Michigan describes that when records were expunged by people who had a criminal history, they saw a 23% increase in their employment rates and a 20% higher wages at the jobs that they worked at. Both of those percentages are higher than Michigan's overall state average. When we pass a legislation like this, and in the places that it has already been instituted in, we do not see any negatives. We do not see any problems. We see people judging others by who they currently are. We see employment rates go up when there is a crisis with our job shortages. And we see recidivism rates go down when our prisons are bulging to 2 million individuals. We need to pass this legislation to help fix our economy and our prison systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Period for the judges, 2 minutes, 58 seconds. Seeing as this is the first speech and affirmation, Jenna holds a 2-minute question period. Questions for the judge now. It goes to Representative Zell.
Great speech, Representative. So background checks allow employers to know sort of their people's background criminal history, correct?
Correct.
All right, and you said that when we have less restrictions in place, that helps lower recidivism rates, right?
That is one of the benefits, yes.
So why don't we just focus on lowering restrictions instead of erasing the possibility of a background check in the first place?
Right, so many of these restrictions are not in place by a federal mandate, but by states and by
So why don't we make those a federal mandate instead of just eliminating background checks?
Here, Representative, so you talk about how states with high restrictions have higher recidivism rates, right?
Correct.
But could those higher recidivism rates be the reason behind that, the more strict laws?
Representative, the higher recidivism rates followed the restrictions being put in place, did not precede it.
How do you know
it's what the study it's what the study from the Arizona State University said. Now, I cannot confirm to you a direct cause, but all data that we have points to high restrictions, high
correlation. Thank you.
Burkholder.
The status quo, what's the biggest deterrent to crime?
Police laws.
Okay, so when you omit background checks, where are they? I believe Representative Zhang brought up background checks, right? That's the biggest advantage here.
Representative, you're worried about people breaking laws or committing egregious crimes. This piece of legislation is talking about misdemeanors.
Egregious crimes, you said. So
vandalism.
egregious crimes shouldn't be on people's background checks anymore.
No, I'm
what
saying that they
Class
should.
A misdemeanors?
What are?
Yeah, what are? Can you give? What are some misdemeanors?
Misdemeanors are pretty
Right.
small
So going
crimes,
off the previous
Representative.
line of questioning, would you say child endangerment is a felony or misdemeanor?
Representative, it's a misdemeanor as outlined under
Right.
this
So do
bill.
you think someone who endangered a child, should be working in childcare?
No, Representative.
By omitting these, misdemeanors from background checks, don't you think that it would inhibit these employers to see
So
that?
according to this bill, it has to be a small crime. It outlines that in section 2A.
Right.
I understand that you might have found some research online.
Unfortunately, the
That's not what
question
the
period
bill
has
says.
elapsed. The speaker will not take those seconds.
I think the chair.
Chair says you're welcome. Seeing as that was a first speech and affirmation, Chair now seeks a first speech and negation. Also speaker to now. Let it go to Representative Stouffer.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Representative Tepfer, T-O-E-P-F-E-R, for my judges in the back. T-O-E-P-F-E-R. I'll go ahead and get started momentarily, just as soon as all my judges show me you're ready. A thumbs up would be great. Just nice and high. My judges over there. Good. Good, good. Wonderful. Let me begin. This is Tanya Neal. She was a victim of domestic violence. Her abuser, Nelson Dion, was charged with 4 misdemeanors against her. The judge ordered him not to go anywhere near Tanya, but he was let out on bail and returned to their home the very next day. For the next 2 years, Tanya underwent brutal punching and beating every single day. This led to her unfortunate death by suicide. So when you raise your placard in the affirmation today, I don't just want you to think about Tanya. I want you to think about the 10 million women who suffer like her every single day, in addition to the people in our LGBT community whose abuse we perpetuate when we pass. For them, we fail. First, let's look to how we actually perpetuate a domestic violence. A criminal attorney in Fort Worth tells us on April 12th of 2019 that for a first-time offender, domestic violence is a Class A misdemeanor. National Coalition Against Domestic Violence tells us at the end of 2023 that every 20 minutes, another woman is physically abused. That means from the time I started this speech until now, another woman has turned into a victim. It also continues to say that more than 10 million people annually and 1 in 4 women every single year undergo domestic violence, ensuring injuries such as fearfulness, PTSD, and contacting victim services. Representative Koth, this is the true implication of judging people for their real character. When we keep people out of jails, we keep them in the homes of victims so they continue abuse. When we pass, that's 25% of women whose abuse we perpetuate over and over every single day, because this legislation expunges those records. If Tanya were still here today, I know that she would not only stand up here in negation with me, but also on behalf of every other woman who suffers just like her, in addition to those who suffer in the LGBT community. We fail for them. The next, let's expand upon the LGBT community abuse. Human Rights Campaign tells us on October 18th of 2017 that, quote, the abuse experienced by LGBT individuals can be far more severe than their straight counterparts. So Representative Koth is worried about character and making sure people are out of jail. I'm worried about underrepresented abuse. Look to UCLA School of Law, who tells us on October 2nd of 2020 that LGBT people are more than 4 times likely to be victimized by violent crime in every area except for robbery. Our LGBT counterparts are begging for you to fail this legislation. Don't just fail for them, but fail for Tanya. Remember this face and remember this name before you think about remembering to affirm. We fail for our citizens.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. I approve the judges 3 minutes, 10 seconds. Seeing as that was the first negation speech, 2-minute questioning period. Questions please rise now. Representative Koth.
Hi, Representative. So you talk about those, extreme cases of misdemeanors, but would you say that a majority of misdemeanors are like that?
They're quite formal cases of misdemeanors. Almost every single case of domestic violence, when it's a first offense, is a misdemeanor. That means majority
Right,
of
but
misdemeanors.
of all misdemeanors, what percentage does that make of all misdemeanors?
I don't have an exact statistic, but I can tell you that it is extremely common to the point where 10 million women have to suffer every year. That's too much for me, Representative. When I'm standing up here on their behalf, I'm not going to let their abuse be perpetuated because this legislation downplays it.
Young.
Representative, is today's bill going to be letting anyone with a misdemeanor out of prison?
Not necessarily out of prison, but when they go into the workforce and get a background check, it expunges the record of it. That means that people who might be working with victims in a vulnerable area now get to work there more so, strictly because we expunge that record.
Okay, so in correlation with your statistics, how many of those actually portray the amount of abuse and assault we see in correlation with records being expunged?
We don't know about that right now because right now we're not expunging records, which means we're protecting women. When we pass this legislation, we stop protecting women and we stop protecting the LGBT community.
No, thank you.
Representative,
Representative, how would Tanya's situation change if we pass this piece of legislation?
right? Well, that's how it happens in the status quo. We see that on a mass scale when we pass this legislation because every single woman is going to have to see her abuser come home because his record is
Right,
expunged.
because that was, but yours was about bail, right?
Correct.
What does this legislation have to do with bail?
Right, we're not eliminating bail, but we are eliminating the fact that that can pop
Yeah,
up.
but that's after they went through
Sure.
their
As
sentence
I
to
just
face
mentioned,
rehab,
as I just
right?
mentioned in my question with Representative Young, this is what happens
Got it,
when we send them
Marcy?
back into the
Right,
workforce.
so you're saying that we are letting criminals out free, correct, by this bill?
Basically, we're letting them off scot-free for their crimes because we expunge their misdemeanors.
Right, so, but they still have to spend the time in jail, they still have to pay the fine, they still have to pay their punishment, correct?
Sure, absolutely, but that means that they get let off scot-free and they continually abuse women and LGBT people.
And the second time this
That
happened.
should be enough for you to
right,
fail this legislation.
And the second time they abuse a woman or something like that,
Still
what happened?
expunged. Still expunged. We eliminate all misdemeanors.
Are you sure?
When it's a misdemeanor, we expunge it under this legislation.
But a second time through, is it a misdemeanor or a felony?
Unfortunately, the question period has elapsed. The speaker will not take this.
I think the chair.
Trustees are welcome. Seeing as that was a speech in negation, trustee speech in affirmation, also speakers please right now. Representative Young.
I thank the chair. This is Representative Young speaking for the second time today. Really simple, define up the number. The simple knowledge gesture for all my judges here on Charlie Austin. Representative Reddy, when you brought up 1984, it almost made me so excited to talk on this piece of legislation. Because my first thought when looking at this is a totalitarian state, where people are not given second chances, where people are silenced and unable to advance in the world simply because they took one action. Representatives, this is the reason we passed today's bill. But more importantly, we look to passing for two key areas of analysis, with the first being analyzing the expungement disparity in the status quo, and second, how this will benefit our economy. First, I want to begin by talking about the expungement disparity in the status quo. Now, Representative Teffer, when you bring up LGBTQ and women being abused, that is a serious problem we see in the status quo. But I think we have to focus on other areas as well, and that is what I plan to do with this contention. According to the University of Pennsylvania, it is 15 to 25 times more difficult for a minority individual to have their record expunged. And this is only perpetuated when we realize that trying to expunge a misdemeanor in the status quo is like climbing Mount Everest. Because if we look to another article by the Cato Institute, 6.4 of misdemeanors are only expunged within a period of 5 years, showing us that today's legislation is not only essential because of the fact that we need to help these minorities, but because it's difficult for anyone in the status quo to get an expungement. Moreover, I want to look on how this expungement disparity actually harms minorities when they're trying to get ahead in life. According to the University of Maryland, they quote that reduced callbacks for minorities is 60% more likely when they have a misdemeanor on their record. Compare that to an individual who is white or a non-minority, where it's only 50%. Showing us that under today's legislation, we're going to fix the economic indifference we see in the status quo, because we're finally going to get rid of this expungement disparity that has been plaguing minority communities for a long time. Second, it is imperative that we look to passing today's legislation because we have to look at the overall economic benefits. Now, Representative Koth, you briefly mentioned the economic benefits, but I would like to expand on a larger scale. In my previous contention, I analyzed that people have reduced callbacks, and this is the main issue when we see economic harms in our society. In fact, we can look to Santa Clara University when they tell us that, for example, in the state of Texas, annually they lose around $3.5 billion because people with misdemeanors on their record are unable to obtain jobs. Furthermore, they expand that by simply expanding and expunging misdemeanors on a more regular rate, we could see economic boost by the trillions. Representatives, it is essential that we analyze not only the disparity in the status quo, but the economic benefits along with it. It is for these two reasons that I don't want our country to turn into a totalitarian state where nobody gets a second chance. Minorities should not be despaired, and our economy should not have to suffer because these people are unable to get ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 4 seconds. I repeat the judges, 3 minutes and 4 seconds. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, 1 minute questioning period. Questioners, please rise now. That'll go to Representative Topher.
Thank you. Hi, Representative. You talk about not wanting our constituents to be silenced. What about the 10 million women whose abuse we silence when we pass your legislation?
Okay, and here's my response to that.
Most times when there's a repeat misdemeanor, judges will oftentimes make it a felony charge. They will not keep it as a misdemeanor. So I believe that under today's
But when we
legislation, people will still be protected.
When we expunge that misdemeanor, doesn't that mean there's no way for us to know if that's the first offense or the 100th offense?
I would argue that people would still be able to present that,
How
especially if
if
there's an
it's
attorney in a
expunged?
case.
How?
Because there would be prior evidence of that person committing the same crime.
Ready?
You talk about how you say it's incredibly difficult to expunge a misdemeanor in the status quo, correct?
Correct.
Right. So isn't that inherently a good thing because it disincentivizes crime?
No, because we find that the main reason why it's inherently harder is because of backlogging the court system.
Okay, yeah, but like, also like going off of Representative Toker's line of questioning, should we be prioritizing our minorities or our women?
We should be prioritizing everyone, but as I previously stated, a repeat misdemeanor offender is often
Right,
going to
you
be
have
charged
any-
with a felony rather than just the basic misdemeanor.
Do you have any
they were
proof
given.
that this benefits our
Unfortunately, the
minorities?
question for you guys elapsed, the speaker will now take the seat.
I thank the chair.
Tracy's broken. Seeing as that's a speech in the affirmation, chair now seeks speech in negation. Also speakers, please rise now. Representative DePaul, you stand opposed.
I thank the chair. Hi, everyone. That's Representative DuPaul for the second time today. Still spelled the same. If you all don't or need a second, just say something. If not, I'll assume you all are ready. Okay, are you good? Great. Awesome. In 1787, Benjamin Franklin called for the construction of what he called a house of repentance, a place meant to soothe the mind of criminals and an enlightened alternative to public humiliation and torture. That was the first American prison. 250 years later, we've gone awry. We've begun ruining lives instead of rehabilitating, hurting instead of helping, and for all that the affirmative claims to achieve, their advocacy is nothing more than a continuation of that failed policy. Negate. In this debate, both sides agree that ex-offenders deserve a fair shot after their release. The central question here is whether or not this policy succeeds in doing that. The answer is no. Primarily, expunging criminal records from background checks affects everything. Employers do background checks in hiring, schools do background checks in admissions, and banks will even do background checks when deciding for loans for cars or houses. Here's the problem. Reducing the amount of information in these decisions empowers racial discrimination. Let's look specifically at job applications, because when ex-felons have jobs, they're less likely to reoffend. Unfortunately, this legislation is a step back rather than a step forward. Right now, an employer can use criminal records to guide their decisions. The relevant difference is that in the affirmative world, you don't get rid of discrimination, you get rid of information. And in the absence of information, employers resort to discrimination and racist assumptions. And that's not hypothesis, that's fact. University of Michigan Law School professor Sonja Starr sent 15,000 online applications from fictitious candidates to employers before and after criminal record information was removed from job applications. They sent two identical applications, one from a fictitious young white man and one from a fictitious young black man, using distinctive popular first and last names to indicate race. They found that the absence of criminal record information in this process decreased the chance of a callback for a black-sounding name by 38%. So Representative Young, callback disparity actually increases under your advocacy. That flips your impact to the negation. Now, Representative Koff, you asked for the net harm. Here it is. Employers defaulting to prejudiced and racist assumptions about race and criminality means not only ex-cons get hurt, it's anyone with a black-sounding name. Harvard Business Review in 2020 found that the removal of criminal records in the job application process meant that white felons and black non-felons had roughly equal chances at employment. Not because the odds of employment for white felons increased, but because employers assumed black applicants had criminal records, decreasing their chance. That's why you can kick out any affirmative claims about decreasing discrimination. Passing this bill forces prisoners to keep serving their sentence long after their time is up. Negate.
Thank you, Representative, for the speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. I repeat the judges, 3 minutes, 9 seconds. 1 minute questioning period. Questioners, please rise now. Over to Representative Alvarado.
Hi.
Representative, so you talked about how an absence of background checks leads to racist assumptions, right?
Yeah, well, not the absence of background checks, the absence of information in these background checks.
Okay, so where does this happen?
I gave you the example of job applications.
Yeah, in what company?
It wasn't a company, it was 15,000 job applications sent around the country.
Okay, so what happened to the companies that discriminated against these people?
It was a general study to find a trend. It wasn't against a specific company.
Okay,
That's
so
not relevant.
when companies actually do this, do they get punished?
No.
They don't get punished.
It's racial discrimination. They can't necessarily prove it in a court.
Representative, who is more likely to get hired, a black worker with a criminal record or a black worker without a criminal record?
We actually found that comparing it to white felons, when that information was removed, white felons had the same chance as black non-felons.
Right, so if you say that it doesn't really make a difference, then...
No, I'm saying, in the absence of this information, discrimination actually worsens.
Right, but for black constituents, is it easier for them to get hired if they have a criminal record or if they don't?
Today's legislation makes it harder for them.
Unfortunately, the questioning period has elapsed. The speaker will now take their seats.
I thank the chair.
Chair says you're welcome. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, the chair has a speech in affirmation. Also speaker, please rest down. Go to Representative.
Thank you, Chair. That's Representative Chandran, spelled Chandran, for the second time today on the affirmation. Any indication that you're ready, and I'll accept it. Ready? When we're in times of darkness, we're told to focus on the light at the end of the tunnel. But for Americans who made one mistake in their life, trying to write a new chapter of life, there is often no light at the end of the tunnel. Instead, there's suffering, there's despair, and there's a chance that they will never make it in this country. Pass this bill to start sparking the light. Now, I just want to quickly address some misconceptions. Representative Topher and others tried to tell you that it isn't safe to let misdemeanants to walk past scot-free into employment. I'll show you just how dangerous that sentiment is. The Department of Justice explains in April 2022 that the major contributor to recidivism rates is a lack of resources or connection to resources that, or in-prison integration into the community. Without a job or a home, misdemeanants are forced to commit crime because they don't have the economic freedom to not do so. Representative Topher, I sympathize with your cause. I sympathize with your story of Tanya, but the likelihood of a domestic abuser coming from their punishment and committing another crime is only increased when you fail this legislation. Their recidivism rates are decreased when you pass this bill. But then again, failing this piece of legislation doesn't help the stories of others like Tanya. I will work tirelessly with you to make sure that these victims are helped. But that doesn't mean that we can't pass this legislation to help other Americans as well. And Representative DePaul, I just won't buy this argument that expungement actually hurts ex-convicts, because a 2020 meta-analysis from the Cato Institute found much better employment outcomes and higher wages in states that had expungement policies. You have the empirics, you have the proof, you have to pass this legislation. But second, passing this bill frees minority Americans from the shackles of an unjust system. Now, Representative Young already mentioned the economic disparities that are caused by misdemeanors being on background checks. But this goes so much farther than that. It's racism rooted in a ridiculous justice system. The Equal Employment Opportunities Commission concluded in 2021 that because of rampant inequities in our criminal justice system, having misdemeanors disproportionately harms our minority constituents. Think about it this way. Our justice system is an incessant cycle of inequality. It starts on the streets, where a June 2020 Pew Research report finds that black adults are 5 times as likely as white Americans to be unfairly stopped by police, meaning they are more likely to have a criminal record. But then after that, they're forced to fight an insurmountable battle in the courtroom. The Atlanta Journal reported in December of 2021 that more often than not, minority defendants take predatory plea deals to misdemeanors that they never committed because the judge sets a bail that they cannot afford to avoid pretrial detention. In the status quo, our courts have become battlegrounds where justice becomes the casualty in our courts. Black and brown lives are shattered by a system that fails to see the person behind the pigment. A person who had no choice but to pay for a mistake they never committed is not dangerous. For our minority Americans, their maximum punishment isn't 1 year in prison. It is a life sentence of suffering. Representatives, I'm not raising my voice here because I'm angry or upset. I'm raising my voice because behind my voice are those of black and brown Americans whose voices that we've never heard. Give them a light at the end of this bill. Will you hear their plea for help? Please pass.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Judges, 3 minutes and 10 seconds. 1 minute questioning period. Questioners, please rise now. Then I go to Representative. It goes to Representative DePaul.
You tell us that misdemeanants are forced to commit crimes because they don't have employment.
Yes.
Right. So when finding employment becomes harder for Black Americans after expungement, how can they find a light at the
I
end of
just
the tunnel?
disagree with that argument.
You can't disagree with it because it doesn't
meta-analysis
sound right.
across the nation from multiple states found better employment outcomes for those who had their misdemeanors expunged.
Not for Black Americans. I empirically proved that with a more specific study.
That's not true. I literally provided
Representative,
with the
please
meta-analysis.
do not, please ask a question, don't just ask a phrase. Thank you. Representative Topher?
Thank you. Hi, Representative. I'm confused. How does expunging the history of abuse not leave the victims that we represent more vulnerable to
Again,
abuse?
I don't see how failing this legislation helps the others like Tanya. Because again, that's a problem with that's just a problem with domestic abuse in itself.
Right. When we
can-
expunge the records, we give them the opportunity to continually abuse, especially in the workforce.
Expunging records, again, there's certain positions where they can actually see sealed records. For example, when people work with children, they're forced to see those sealed records
Not under
because
this legislation because we
unfortunately,
expunged
any
the
question
entire.
that has the last statement. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, you're welcome.
Madam Parley,
Yes.
may I request that we change open chamber to only in between speeches?
Yes, I thought that that was what was established. If you were up and moving around, and then they come back,
That is what open chamber means, so.
they should not be
They
moving
should not be
during
moving.
questioning period, yes.
If someone could close that door, thanks. Okay, seeing as that was a speech in the negation, the chair now seeks a speech in the affirmation. All such speakers please rise now. That was my mistake. Since that was a speech in the negation, chair now seeks a speech. Oh, did I do it again? Speech in affirmation, rise now.
Affirmation.
Now negation. There we go. All speakers, negation. There we go. Representative Zhang, stand and opposed. My apologies for the confusion.
Good. My name is Representative Zhang, spelled Z-H-A-N-G. This is my second time speaking today, second time this session. And just to clarify, I'm speaking on the negation. If I could just get a thumbs up from all those above me, I'll begin. Lyndon B. Johnson began the war on crime with one single goal in mind: create a safer, more secure America for everyone. But what the war on crime has actually led to is a crisis in mass incarceration. I urge the negation of today's bill because it fails to address the root cause behind high recidivism rates. Now, let's talk about misdemeanors and what specifically those misdemeanors entail. I'd like to start by talking about Representative Young's point about expungement of misdemeanors. Well, according to a 2023 Forbes article from Christy Bieber, certain types of misdemeanors can be expunged if they're considered minor enough by the court. But then there's other types of misdemeanors that just can't be expunged no matter how many times you go to court. And those types of misdemeanors are the more serious ones. Those include assault, sexual violence, and domestic violence. And by doing that current expungement system, that ensures that we allow people to have a second chance, but we also ensure the safety of other people. Because Representative Koff, why do we want to have a teacher working with young children to have a track record of public indecency and assault? Why do we want to have a nurse working with vulnerable patients every day to have a track record of possession of illegal drugs? The reality of background checks is it allows employers who work with vulnerable populations on a day-to-day basis to ensure the safety of the communities that they serve. Now, but I do want to talk about Representative Chand's point, because he's absolutely right when he tells us that we face inequity on every single level of the justice system. But how do we actually fix that? Well, it's not just by expunging misdemeanors. That simply removes any type of consequence or any safety guard for everybody. What we instead need to do is focus on structural reforms. That starts with understanding what happens when people are created into a mass incarceration system. Now look to a 2023 study completed by Stanford's Network on Addiction Policy, who explained that community-based solutions help exponentially with actually reducing recidivism levels. Drug courts, for example, mandate court sessions for treatment, especially in addiction, and they actually help nonviolent drug offenders curb their addiction while giving them the incentive to expunge their record of any crime. And that's how we really make sure that people are given a second chance, by creating treatment and creating an opportunity. So when we talk about second chances for everyone, it starts by changing the mass incarceration system itself. For this, I urge negation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. I appreciate the judges. 3 minutes, 9 seconds. 1 minute questioning period. Questioners, please press now. Representative Coe.
Hi, Representative. So when this bill is passed and we see a decrease in recidivism rates, why wouldn't that help with your issue of repeat offenders?
We're absolutely not seeing a decrease in recidivism. Recidivism comes when we create solutions that solve people's crises in the first place. It starts when we invest in community welfare programs. It starts when we invest in better community-based solutions.
How are we not seeing a decrease in recidivism when multiple studies show
All we're doing is reducing the punishment
jobs?
for a crime. That doesn't give people an incentive to solve those issues. When we create community-based solutions,
How often are
they
misdemeanors
do.
actually expunged?
They're only expunged occasionally when they meet certain standards.
Occasionally, give a statistic.
I don't have a statistic.
I provided
on that.
you a statistic from the Cato Institute specifically saying 6.4%
You absolutely
in the
did,
first
but that
5 years.
statistic is based on the current status quo that prevents the expungement of certain serious misdemeanors. Under today's legislation, we expunge all misdemeanors, no matter the severity, which means
So
that
only
your statistic
6.4%
fails to
of misdemeanors
understand
are able
the
to be
context
expunged?
of today's bill.
Only 6.4% of misdemeanors to be expunged?
Absolutely not, because under today's
Unfortunately, the question
legislation,
period
it
has
creates
elapsed. The
all.
speaker will now take your seat.
I thank the chair.
Chair says you're welcome. I'd just like to make it known real quick that if you stand up after I call a question or show the time, I'm not going to go back and fix it. That even if once it passes like 5 seconds. Does that make sense for everybody? Is that cool? All right. Seeing as that was a speech to the negation, Chair has a speech to the affirmation. Also true right now. Then I go to Representative Banal.
Chair. Hey guys, name's Representative Nala, speaking for the second time today, still representing the 13th District of Ohio, sitting in seat 4 if that helps. If I get a nod, smile, or gesture when you guys are ready, that would be great. Alright, you look good. As debaters in the next building over try to philosophize whether rehabilitation should be the primary concern of prisons, I want to remind this chamber of one solemn fact. Our goal as a congressperson is not to be a logician or a philosopher. It's to do one thing: improve the lives of Americans. Because this piece of legislation does exactly that, we pass. Because first, this piece of legislation works. Period. Now, Representative Tepper and Zinn told you that employers ought to be able to deny people with safety concerns, but here's why: that's empirically false. Representative Young talked about a study that talks about what happens right now, but a University of Michigan study from May of 2020 found that even if we expunge all laws, the safety for those who face expungement will actually go up. The bottom line is people actually reform and change the criminal justice system. And they quote a finding that defuses common public safety objections to expungement laws. Understand, Representative Tepper, Tanya was hurt because her abuser didn't go through the criminal justice system. That doesn't happen in today's discussion. Next, Representative Hall wants to tell you that this legislation increases race-based denials of people hired, but because it replaces denials based on convictions. Except for the fact that convicting in America is based on race in the first place. So no matter how you sliced it, in America, people of minorities will be hurt. That's a non-unique impact. So the reason why we vote in affirmation today is for the one sole reason: to lower recidivism rates, as Representative Chamberlain explained so well in his speech. Okay, but second, understand that this piece of legislation gives Americans back their dignity. Representative Cobb told you that we need to pass this piece of legislation to ensure that Americans get more jobs. But it goes so much further than that. Because the Code for America, a nonpartisan charitable organization, wrote in August of 2021, many convicts find themselves suffering from serious mental health issues. Why? They explain that, quote, when applying for jobs, people living with convictions face the constant and frustrating reminder through their past background checks. It's a massive effort that takes a toll on their mental health. Repeated rejections reinforce the feeling of being less than. But understand that this reported feeling of feeling less than does more than cause just a few off days or a bit of lethargicness. Because the University of Washington revealed in March of 2022 that, quote, those who've been formerly imprisoned face a 42% increased risk of suicide because this Congress continuously denies them over and over again. Understand Representative Teffer. We need to save thousands of lives. It's not just about one edge case, it's about thousands of lives that get saved from the threat of suicide when we pass. Representative Paul, understand that we shouldn't let the color orange color our judgment. Because at the end of the day, when we become the judge and jury of former criminals for the rest of their lives, we have only one choice: to become the executioner. Don't let that happen today. Pass. Because we have one goal as representatives: to make America better. That starts with passing.
Thank you, Representative, for the speech of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. I repeat the judge's 3 minutes, 7 seconds. 1 minute question period. Questions, please rise now. Representative Topher, stand up first.
Thank you. Hi, Representative. So you talk about how the safety for those who face expungement increases. What about the safety for the victims, which decreases?
Oh no, I've just been safety in the workplace. The safety for victims does not decrease.
Well, how is safety in the workplace increased when you have abusers who are allowed to work in vulnerable environments?
Well, a few things. Abusers face the criminal justice system, and abusers want to get their life on track. That is a fact.
Okay.
That's why inspection laws work.
I'll move on. You say you want to protect lives, but I challenge your thousands of lives with 10 million. Why don't you flip your vote to the negation where we actually
Because
save
10
people's
million
lives?
lives don't get framed if we pass this piece of legislation.
10 million women who are beaten
they are
down.
safe.
Do employers have the right to know who they are hiring?
They don't have the right if that leads to thousands of more suicides each year. I'm trying to save lives, representatives.
But
That starts with
don't
passing.
employers have an obligation to their employees, their customers,
Yeah,
their
and
staff?
we have an
to protect
obligation
them?
to save American lives. That starts with
With
passing.
background checks, when they conduct background checks and they find things like misdemeanors, don't they know who they are hiring and exactly what
Yeah,
they're
they get to propagate their biases. They can let the color orange color their judgment. I won't let that happen today. That's why we pass.
Seeing negligible time, the chair will absorb it. And Speaker may proceed. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, Chair seeks a speech in negation. Also, Speaker goes now. That'll go to Representative. It goes to Representative Burkholder.
I thank the chair. Hello, everybody. My name is Representative Burkholder, speaking for the second time in this final round today. It's about I'm seated in seat 15, if that helps any of the judges figure out who I am. Judges, there's a lot of you back there, so I'll just assume everybody's ready. And if anybody isn't, just start screaming or throw something at me. They probably think. There's something about human nature that draws us towards this dichotomous pattern of thought, an all or nothing, us or them style of thinking. The option is either good or it's bad. In such a model, complexity and subtle nuance with multiple possible outcomes and routes towards a goal are completely ignored. This legislation offers an all or nothing approach. Misdemeanors, they're all expunged or not. Find your footing on the negation. Stand with me and fail. But first, you failed this legislation to uphold employer rights, something that I just questioned Representative Pinella on. A Society for Human Resource Management survey found that 92% of employers conduct employment background screenings prior to hiring their applicants. This is important because background checks reveal to the employer the records of the candidate or the employee, something that they have the right to know. And the Criminal Justice Research Alliance finds that an individual's arrest record can help predict whether or not he or she will re-offend and is the most accurate in predicting behavior immediately following an individual's request. This is important for companies to know. Companies need to know who they're hiring. They need to know the past of their future employee. Now, me and the affirmation agree on one thing: safety in the workplace. And Representative Zong says that in order to ensure safety in the workplace, employers have to know who they're hiring. And I absolutely agree. Let me provide the words. Markle in 2020 writes, employers have a legal obligation to protect their business, their staff, and their customers from any foreseeable act of an employee or volunteer. If your organization fails to conduct a background check prior to hiring an employee or volunteer commits a crime while on the job, your organization or business assumes total liability for their actions. Representative Pinella, safety in the workplace isn't letting those with DUIs, domestic violence charges, and assault charges, and theft charges be scratched from their records like they are in the affirmation. Stand with me and fail today. Now, the impact here is when you pass, is you're going to see a rapid increase in crimes committed. A study conducted by Victim Support. Right now, 60% of crimes go unreported. And Cato Institute estimates that 13 million Americans are charged with misdemeanor offenses. Using the 60% figure we mentioned earlier, that means 20.8 million misdemeanor offenses go unreported every single year in the United States. We have a crime epidemic in the US, and it only balloons on the affirmation. As Rector Sudisky, LLC writes, most misdemeanor crimes come with penalties like probation, rehabilitation classes, fines, and some community service. The maximum sentence is 12 years. Now, Representative Koff, in cross-examination, makes the bold claim to me that just because misdemeanors are expunged doesn't mean they'll go up. But I wish he was right. As Church Law and Tax writes in 2022, criminal records checks not only decrease the risk of reoffending, but they also decrease the risk of institutional liability. The problem specifically with this legislation is that deterrence is completely removed. Everyone on earth can just keep and start shoplifting like their lives depend on it. There's no real penalty when it never shows up on your background check. Representative Pinola, recidivism only sees an increase when we remove the biggest deterrent in the status quo. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Fail this legislation.
Thank you, Representative, for the speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. I approve the judges 3 minutes and 10 seconds. 1 minute questioning period. Questions please rise now. The other go to Representative. It goes to Representative.
Hi, Representative. So do people commit misdemeanors just because they have the opportunity or because they have no choice?
It could be a combination of both, absolutely.
Okay, so why, when we provide them with more jobs, we provide them with economic security, they're going to be more likely to
cited a
commit
very
crimes?
extensive study that says we don't apply them with more jobs because of this discrimination within the applicant and within the hiring process.
Representative, in the places where a bill like this was instituted, we saw an increase in employment with people who have misdemeanors. How does that not the case that it will increase employment?
Because companies still have inherent races and biases. They're
Employers
not
would be
going to hire.
held liable for this legislation because they have to do the proper
Held liable for things that happen on their grounds. In their
Exactly. So if you expunge a misdemeanor, isn't that they can't do anything about it? They're still conducting background checks. How are they still held liable?
Wait, they're still conducting background checks, but they don't know about the misdemeanor.
Yeah, but that's not that's just tort of negligence, right? Like they can't do anything about it. They just have to conduct a background check to satisfy not.
Right, but when you see misdemeanors on people's records, like driving under the influence and assault,
yeah,
I think
those
those are pretty important to know when you're not
liable
hire
or
somebody.
Unfortunately, the questioning period has elapsed. This will have to proceed.
I thank the chair.
Justice, you're welcome. Seeing as that was a speech of negation, chair now takes a speech in affirmation. Also, to us now. We'll go to Representative Sword.
Hello, Representatives. This is Representative Soto speaking for the first time in this final round. Delivered to judges on seat and seat 3. Again, as soon as I get a thumbs up from my judges. When I was in school, I always had trouble with math. Something about the formulas just never made sense to me. But what I can see is that the math on this legislation checks out. When we pass, we reduce recidivism, and that is a fact. So use the right formula, get the right answer, stand in the affirmation. Which brings me to my first point of contention, lowering recidivism. So first, let's look at how passing this legislation acts to reduce recidivism. It does this because according to the Center for American Progress in 2021, those with expunged criminal records have a lower recidivism rate than those with a criminal record. Furthermore, as according to the National Institute of Justice in 2019, those with a criminal record have significantly more difficulties in getting a job because their record signals to employers that they are more likely to commit crimes even if they never will. Representative DuPaul, you say that by passing, we make our constituents serve their sentence even after they release. What you fail to see is that you are doing that by standing in the negation. And then, Representative Burkholder, you argue the rights of employers, but what you're really arguing is the right to misconception. And this issue is specifically prevalent with misdemeanor offenders. And this is shown by the Cato Institute in 2021 telling us that misdemeanor offenders are 38% less likely to be reissued with a criminal charge within 2 years than that of all other offenders. Further, misdemeanors make up 80% of all arrests. So what we see is that when we pass this legislation, we reduce recidivism for 80% of criminals. Representative Tupper, the story you tell is not one of expunging records, but one of bail. My heart goes out to the women you tell us about, and that's why you should be standing in the affirmation. Because this legislation reduces crime, reduces recidivism, and protects them. Then, Representative Zhang, you talk about reducing recidivism, but that's exactly what we do when we pass today's legislation. So you should be standing in the affirmation. This brings me to my second point of contention, prison overpopulation. So secondly, let's look at how by decreasing crime and reducing recidivism, we act to alleviate prison overpopulation status quo. Prison overpopulation is incredibly prevalent with over 2 million Americans in prisons, with prisons at an average of 106% capacity, as according to Prison Policy Institute in 2022. this resulting in increased rates of mental health issues, violence, self-harm, and suicide. As according to the Office of Justice Programs 2021, and as I just showed in my first point of contention, when we pass, we reduce recidivism for 80% of prisoners, acting to alleviate prison overpopulation and rectify the inhumane conditions they suffer. That is why you pass, for the humanity of our constituents. Representatives, I've just shown you that the math checks out. When we pass, we reduce recidivism, reduce crime, and protect our constituents. So use the right formula, get the right answer, stand in the affirmation. Thank you.
There's your representative for the speech of 2 minutes and 51 seconds. There are judges, 2 minutes and 51 seconds. 1 minute question period. Questions please rise now. Go to Representative. Goes to Representative Breton.
Right, so on a logical standpoint, should employers be able to know what misdemeanors or any charges that their employees have been charged with?
Right, so I see what you're getting at, and in theory, yes, but that knowledge is predicated on a misconception that they're going to read the crimes. As I showed in my first contention, they're significantly less likely than all other offenders.
Just on a logical standpoint, like, wouldn't, like, knowing how they work and, like, what they've done in the past help them know?
Again, in theory, yes, but that's not actually representative, because misdemeanor offenders are significantly less likely to commit crime.
Do criminal background checks act as a deterrent to crime?
Yes, but so does the
when we
sentence they
remove
receive.
any threat to a background check under this legislation, how are we not removing a deterrent to crime? How is crime rate going to go down?
The significantly greater deterrent to crime is the prison sentence that they suffer. This legislation doesn't remove that. They're still
Why
subject
is
to any
recidivism
punishment.
so high if punishment's such a successful deterrent, like you said?
Recidivism is high because after they've been released, they still suffer from their actions. They can't get a job and rectify their life issues that led to them.
Okay, so punishment is a end-all be-all. It's perfect. It's a great.
Unfortunately, the question period has elapsed. We're going to proceed.
Thank you, Chair.
I would ask that the observers please close the door.
If you are standing by the door and somebody comes in between rounds, please just make sure you close it.
Okay.
Just close it.
Seeing as that was the speech of the affirmation, should not speech engaged, all such speakers please rise now. Skis, you still
I thank the chair. For the judges, my name is Representative Peace. That's spelled P-E-A-S-E. I'm seated in seat 12, and as always, since I'm at the leisure of all of those above me, I will happily begin when you all are ready. Representative Chandran mentioned the light at the end of the tunnel in today's debate. But Representative Chandran, I'm sorry to say that you and the rest of the affirmation seem to be blinded by this very light. Representative Burkholder just championed employer rights, but allow me to give specific examples of scenarios for which the affirmation has no answer. In order to obtain a commercial driver's license needed for long-haul shipping of dangerous cargo, one must undergo a criminal background check, which means by passing today, we allow those who have been convicted of DUIs and even of negligent homicide to obtain these licenses where they can place our constituents in further harm. Representative Koth, when asked during questioning whether someone who is convicted of child endangerment should be able to work in childcare, you could not say no, because no would mean a vote for the negation. When convicted of domestic violence, as Representative Tepfer mentioned, and in addition, those convicted of stalking and in some states assault of a school official are allowed to work in situations that are meant for the cultivation of our children. This will not be the United States of America. Representatives Koth and Panala, you claim this bill helps employment. I ask you, employment of who? Does ensuring our constituents are protected actually harm them? No, it doesn't. And representatives, do you value our constituents' livelihood above money? I sure hope the answer is yes. Now, Representative Young, you mentioned backlogs in our court system while being questioned by Representative Reddy, and I'm glad you brought up the court system. Expunging misdemeanors from criminal background checks could mean more and more people accused of misdemeanors decide to go to trial, because even if they are convicted, it won't go on their record. Wealthier constituents undoubtedly have a wider access to the legal system, an easier time paying fines as well, while our poor citizens do not. Representative Pinalla, you stated in your affirmative speech that convictions do follow a racial line. I agree, but your point falls to the negation. If more people are going to trial, this system of telling our constituents that their conviction won't go on their permanent record only furthers the racial and economic disparity that Representative Chandran and Pinalla seem to oppose. And Representative Young, I just showed you that passing today actually worsens the backlogs in our court system. It doesn't help them whatsoever. Representatives, I implore you, don't be blinded by the light of the affirmation in today's debate. Stand with me and the negation and stand for our constituents.
Thank you, Representative, for the speech of 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Judges, 3 minutes, 2 seconds. 1 minute questioning period. Now, Representative Lesor.
Right, so can you explain how expunging records increases our core backlogs?
Yes, so as Representative Moore stated during questioning in the speech just before me, removing the big criminal background checks, removing misdemeanors from criminal background checks actually gives an incentive for people to participate in crime. And I also just showed that it gives an incentive to go to trial.
That when we expunge records, that actually reduces recidivism. So wouldn't that just shorten our core backlogs?
Representative, by telling people who are accused of misdemeanors that their crime won't go on their permanent record, we are giving wealthier constituents an incentive to go to trial.
Yeah. Okay, Representative, so if I told you in my speech that those who grew up in expungement had extremely low subsequent crime rates, comparing favorably to the general population, doesn't that mean ex-convicts are safer than American people?
No, Representative, the American people are not safer when ex-convicts like the affirmation allows.
Says that specifically. How can you go up here and just oppose it?
Representative, I just showed you that there are deliberate situations.
Yes, situations. On net, if they're safer, how doesn't that help America?
Representative, it is not a net safety factor for our constituents.
Unfortunately, the question period has elapsed.
I thank the chair.
Motion to recess for the allotted time.
Second?
Second.
Opposition?
Opposition. Since my appealship is actually next session, I would have a speech that I wrote on this topic I would like to give. If it is possible to extend the time by like 1 or 2 minutes, I feel like I could get my speech in. Would that be possible?
Because there's an opposition, we would have to take a vote. I would say whatever the chamber decides.
Okay, so if you guys would like to do so, then, so anyone who would like to move to that recess, placards, raise. Okay, anyone who would like to not do that? Everybody else, perfect. Okay, so we will now resume debate on the piece of legislation F1, and we just had a speech of negation, so a speech of affirmation. Also speakers please raise now. Representative Ganavarthy, you stand unopposed.
I thank the chair and the chamber for passing the motion. This would be my second time speaking today, second time speaking this session. My name is Representative Ganavarthy, spelled Godavarthi. I am at the leisure of those above me, and I'm seated at seat 7 for the judge's convenience. Please give me an indication or nod, and I will begin. Give me 1 second. Scott Lang, Ant-Man, a superhero. He was once imprisoned too, and he worked a job at Baskin-Robbins. But what people often fail to realize about him is that he was fired for having a criminal record. Although Scott Lang might have recovered quite well from this, 1 in 3 Americans don't. Today, you affirm because we directly help the economy by the affirmation of this bill, and because the negation is based off of a huge misinformation. First, affirm because we inherently help our economy. According to NBC News, finding work becomes hard with a criminal record. In fact, this is furthered in the same article by saying approximately 1 in 3 Americans struggle with finding work. By affirming this legislation, we omit misdemeanors, which account for approximately 13 million people each year. 13 million people each year who recommit crimes because they can't find a suitable job. 13 million people who commit crimes to feed themselves and their families. But now that we've established why this bill impacts our economy in a profitable way, let's look at why the negation is internally wrong. Representative Topher, let's start with you. What you fail to realize is that the second time that a violent misdemeanor is committed, it is turned into a felony. Now, I don't want anyone to go through what the girls that Representative Topher brought up. But regardless of passage of this bill, what Representative Topher said will happen. At the same time, it helps others come out of a vicious cycle of poverty. By affirming today, we help our constituents, Representative Topher, and the women's situation you bring up should not happen to anyone. But next, the negation's main misconception. Representative DuPaul, you champion that background checks and the omissions of such records. You say this hurts our children and our schools. But what you fail to realize is that Gill and Matthews LLP in 2023 states that certain people are allowed to look at all omitted information. There are levels to a background check. At the highest level, corporations working with elders, children, minorities, or something that would affect them are allowed to look through omitted pieces of information. So the entire negation's point of saying we can't let a violent person work with children falls, because a violent person will never work with children. Scott Lang recovered. Give our constituents, my constituents, and your constituents the same chance to recover. Pass today's legislation.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Our judges, 3 minutes, 10 seconds. 1 minute questioning period. Questioners, please rise now. Let it go to Representative Peace.
Representative, you mentioned that the second time a domestic abuser is convicted is considered a felony, correct?
Yes.
So for you, does it take multiple people undergoing this traumatic abuse for it to be considered serious enough to be considered in a background check?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all, Representative.
So if
what
one
I'm
person
saying
is abused, it's a misdemeanor and it's expunged.
Regardless of today's passage or not, these will remain a misdemeanor. These people will serve
but now
that
someone
crime.
who has abused
people,
another person will have their misdemeanor
regardless
expunged
of the
from their
status
permanent
quo
record.
or the passage of this bill, the situation does not change.
Great speech, Representative. Now, you talked about how recidivism can be reduced when people have jobs, right?
Sure.
So why don't we focus on creating more educational programs for former convicts and incentivizing more back to society programs for them instead of expunging all records?
We can do both, Representative. What you're saying is a great idea, but that's not the legislation we're debating
So when we
today.
expunge all records, we make sure that people have no incentives to not commit crimes.
That is not true. In fact,
and it doesn't actually
certain corporations can
Unfortunately,
actually
the question
look
period
at
has
the
elapsed.
information.
Took their seat.
I think the chair and the chamber.
Justice, you're welcome.
Motion to recess to be allowed time.
Seconds? Second. Any opposition? Seeing none, that motion does carry. We will now move to recess for 10 minutes.
I've been standing.
Thank you all for my seconds.
I'm not allowed to
I really appreciate it.
Judges, don't forget to give